All right. What's good, y'all? Hoping everybody's well. Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Y'all know how it is. We are today on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, X, Instagram, and of course, YouTube. So I hope y'all are well. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel so we can continue to bring you this independent black male thought. So hit it up, y'all. Hope you're good. I see a lot of people checked in early. Much appreciated. Say shout out to John. Good brother Ian in the house. Much appreciated, man. That brother's been holding me down for the longest. Shout out to Ian. Artisan MC, what's good, man? Y'all check out the Artisan MC channel, especially his live shows at 11 a.m. Pacific on YouTube. Urban Naturalist, what's good? We got Judas Blues, Code Father, what's going on? Code Father X. William in the house. I don't think so. I invited BGS, but I don't think he's gonna pop through. Because I was gonna originally do the show Tuesday night, and I ended up getting back from the theater a little too late, so that kind of threw everything off. Shout out to Spain Man. What's up? Mark, what's going on? Ron, appreciate the membership. Welcome to the Onyx Brotherhood. We got OX Hermes. Marcus, what's up? Big Mo. Distinguished. Let's see. A+. Creative Ninja Person. Shout out to Dar for the support. He says for your therapy. That's real talk. That is real, and I'll tell you why in a quick second. But I appreciate that. Poor Man's Passport. What's up? Ron Barry. What's going on? Longo Ninja. KJ. What's happening? Aquatechy in the building. What's going on, man? Dub Will. All right. What's up? Hurricane. We got Damian H for the donation. Appreciate that. Chef Mike, what's good with you, man? Need to get with you, man. I made some prime rib the other night. I might need to get some feedback on how I went about it. So I gotta holler at you at some point. Dar. Let's see what's up. We got Ruthless Heartless Revelator. What's up? Slauson, what's up? Got Donnie in the house, Lord of Brooklyn, Anthony, J. Rob, Damian H. Welcome to the Onyx Brotherhood. Let's see. Shout out to Barry. He says rehab fee for Doc during the reboot of that god awful movie. Real talk. Dead set. What's going on, man? What's going on with you? Hope you good, man. Anime, appreciate that support. Says it should have been named The Color Misandry. Oh, y'all going in already. That's right. Well, let me go ahead and get this started, man. This we're brothers in here. Ghetto user, appreciate that support. Says support for the program. Happy holidays to you and the whole chat. Much appreciated, man. Yeah. Oh, M Lavo, appreciate that support. Says the child ain't yours, and I love when she says you're the only one I'm with. Ouch. Great post on Facebook. Yeah. All right. So look, man, this was particularly hard, and I subjected myself to it because I think today what I'll end up doing is kind of a compare and contrast with the original. Um, I'm not gonna go super in depth, but I have no sense of how long this will take. It could be 20 minutes, it could be 3 hours. I have no idea, no frame of reference whatsoever. And if brothers who have seen the movie are interested in coming up and chatting about it, let me know. And I might open that up like I did the last time. But I just saw this Tuesday night. No, actually, yeah, I think it was Tuesday night I saw it. And what I did is I actually watched the original, and that ended about an hour before it started in the theater. So I watched the original, jumped into the car, went to the theater, and saw the remake. And anyway, we'll get to that in a quick minute. Shout out to Metacog. Says appreciate your leadership. No, appreciate you supporting, man. But yeah, it's Busy Mike. What's up? It's it was rough. It took me back to my childhood because when the original came out in '85, I was 11, and we had gotten HBO, so I saw it. I want to say I saw it in the theaters. I don't remember that part, but I do remember by the time it started playing on TV, they played it every 5 minutes, and so I probably watched it. I can't tell you how many times because we were latchkey kids. And if you don't know what that is, it's an 80s term. It basically meant that, especially if you were child of a single mother, she was always at work. And so we were at home watching TV. Once the chores were done, once homework was done, that's all we did. My sister and I, to this day, we communicate in 80s movies. And every time we watch one, we'll just text each other and just start laughing because we watched so many and that's all we did. And so, we watched Color Purple so many times it's ridiculous. And I read the book. Now, mind you, this is all happening, between 11 and 12 years old. So I'm watching this stuff and I don't really, understand it. I'm just watching and taking it in as a child would. I know I walked away often with a feeling that took me another couple decades to be able to articulate. And a lot of that was shame. It was interesting because Melvin Van Peebles did a documentary on Black film, and he talked about going to movie theaters as a kid and watching films and walking away with a feeling that he didn't know how to explain, and he called it shame. And it had to do with how Black actors were supposed to act in white movies, right? And he felt shame, but he didn't know that's what he was feeling because he was a kid. Fast forward a few decades, I'm getting the same response from a predominantly Black casted film written by a Black woman, and I'm feeling a similar kind of shame but couldn't explain it. And it took, not only longer than that to explain shame, but it took longer than that to you really understand what anti-Black misandry meant, right? There was no framework for that in 1985. It was really kind of a hit piece in many respects because it was wrapped in theatrics. Shout out to Layman's Journal. He did a very brief review of the film, and he actually did a very good. This is how I actually ran into his channel. He did a very good review of the original Color Purple, and he made an excellent kind of summation of the Color Purple. He said it's cat shit or it's shit wrapped in glitter, and he's absolutely right. That's exactly what the original was, and he made an updated review of the second one, which I'll save so you can watch his channel to check it out. But Layman's Journal does a beautiful review of it. Nevertheless, I watched both. And I want to put this in context because I did so because over, I think about a year ago when we first heard this was coming out, we decided that for the most part, black men should protest the color purple. I think in a certain respect, we would have anyway. Shout out to Joseph on the Cash App. Appreciate that. We would have anyway on some level, but to do so with a bit more purpose than just to not go see something we were mildly, disinterested in anyway, but to do so with purpose, because decades after the fact, I mean, almost 40 years, we saw the impact this film had. We saw the impact of Oprah culture. We saw the impact of misandry, the popularization of it. We saw the impact of women monetizing misandry, black women monetizing misandry against black men, most particularly. Now, this is happening in the larger culture. We're seeing this happen with women across the board. But with black women, there's a special flair to it and a special intensity that I think even gave white women pause. And in some respects, gave them the blueprint on how to do it. Now, they only went so far, mainly because they still get married. So they only went so far in it. But for black women, they went all out. And men did not really know how to respond. Now, there was protest against the color purple from Farrakhan to NAACP. But, terms like misandry were never really used. There was no frame of reference. KMK, shout out for the Cash App. Thank you. There wasn't really no frame of reference for, the purposeful, attack on black men. I mean, sometimes people said it, sometimes they generalized it around this isn't good for the community, that kind of language, but there wasn't really a frame of reference because black feminism was still relatively new as far as the mainstream black public was concerned, let alone the larger society. And so by the time you get this, Dominic, shout out to for the Cash App, much appreciated. It's new. And so, that being said, how to, properly frame what takes place after. So like I said, there were protests against the film, but black men, in my assessment, black men never formally organized and responded to feminism or responded to policies that for the most part were targeted at black women that ignored black men altogether. Black men never formally organized. The closest to that we have is this last decade of black men on social media who began to compare notes about their experiences and come to conclusions after measured reflection, debate, back and forth, new information, the news and what's going on. I mean, it took, I'd say, this last decade for black men to have an organized, somewhat organized response, at least some kind of collaborative effort. In the 80s, you had a response, but it kind of came from everywhere and it didn't go further than that. Because we started to see this as more of a blueprint, right? The color purple really kind of popularized misandry in the black community, but then it continued, and Oprah was a big part of that. So you started to see a number of films that continued to come out after that in the same vein, because they found that most particularly white society loved to pay to see black dysfunction, especially at the expense of black men, right? So that was kind of the dynamic. And having grown up watching and reading this, I felt this shame, but I didn't know how to articulate it, and I didn't know what it was. And it took years for me to say, here we have a film where the only definition of what it means to be a good man is to follow women and to do so quietly. That tradition in this new remake has not changed. Hasn't changed. It's the same idea. I remember when I first met Brittany Cooper online, we were debating about something, and it came to me in her, with the group of women that she would have attack me in these little chats, and we go back and forth. But I realized, and I said it at one point, I said, the only kind of men y'all accept are those who quietly, accept what it is you want them to do and do it. I call them concuserves. But at the end of the day, as far as feminism is concerned, that's the only kind of definition of good men that you have. And you still have a lot of men who aspire to that. And much like me with the early color purple, I was conditioned to do so. And this gave ammunition to families of female-led households to use this kind of dynamic to further indoctrinate sons, boyfriends, husbands, you name it, to fall into this pattern of what it meant to be a good black man. It means that you serve at her behest. Your only primary goal is to make her happy. That happy life, happy wife crap. But it didn't apply to just wives. It applied to any black woman or girl in your circle. And to some extent, outside of it. Because you were expected to give your life to serve and protect any black woman in your space. Right? This was the kind of framework that was used. And it was films and projects like these that indoctrinated many of us into this idea of what it meant to be a good black man. Now, at the time, especially at the age of 16, I was a hardcore nationalist. Right? And that meant that if this was the definition of what it meant to be a good man, that I was going to do it. And what I learned the hard way over decades of interaction alongside this ideology of service was that your humanity, your needs, your well-being were irrelevant. You were a tool. You were to be stepped on to, so for somebody else to get to another place, a better position. That was it. No frame of reference for anything beyond that, let alone a black man's humanity. None of that was relevant. And so it, again, going to college, getting more of it. It wasn't quite as intense as it is now as far as this kind of indoctrinating idea, but it was still present. The feminism, you would get in courses that had nothing to do with humanities. It would still come out. Now it's unapologetic. At that time, it just would occur and nobody would say anything. But this is the kind of ridiculousness that jumped off. So let me do a few things. Now, first, I'm going to put up some information about the original, right? So you can kind of see that there. So we got The Color Purple, 1985, directed by Steven Spielberg, right? Which meant that this film automatically got catapulted into a reality most black films don't get, to get the Steven Spielberg treatment. And apparently he went out of his way to cater to Alice Walker to prove that he should be the one to do it. Like she was going to say no, really. I mean, after E.T., Steven Spielberg was untouchable, considered one of the best filmmakers of our generation, if not ever. There's pretty much nobody that's going to tell him no about this. So he decides to do it. Alice Walker gives her approval, right? And we can see some of the characters here, that played in it. Now, part of the reason I'm pulling this up is to say this. On an entertainment level, as far as this film is concerned, hold on. I'm sorry. Got a couple things that I overlooked here. Let's see here. Where'd it go? All right. Shout out to Malika. Appreciate that. He says, peace and love to you, good brother, and to the chat. What's good, Malika? Hope you're well. Shout out to Dead Set. He says, I can't protest against the film because I have a deeply principled stance on free speech. We can lambast it to our heart's desire, though. See, here's the thing. Protest in the sense that we don't have to support projects that denigrate us as black men simply because they were made. I'm not against, ideas being put out into the public, but that doesn't mean I need to finance them either. You know what I'm saying? That's it. I'm not saying that, films that I don't like shouldn't get made. I'm simply saying that black men no longer have to support projects because we're told to, especially when they denigrate us, especially when their whole platform is denigrating us. That's the reality. That's the nature of the protest we were calling into effect a year ago, before, when we found out this film was coming out. Because the way it was sold to us, even in the 80s, was that if you were about the black community, then you needed to support, pretty much any black film that came out, right? That was the idea. And so when this came out, we were told that it was part of our duty to support these kind of projects. And when many of us saw this for the first time, a lot of us didn't really know how to articulate it, how to frame, what kind of frame of reference to give it. And this is what's important. And so this is the first time in my lifetime I've actually seen black men outwardly challenging misandry and making it clear. We don't have to support this. Let me see. Lord of Brooklyn says, can you imagine any male black author making the comments toward black women that Alice Walker made against black men and not being instantly canceled? Yeah. Leon says, I could not think of anything good to write, but I did let my mother know with a meme that I am Mr. Don't test my vigilance. The response was amazing. I'm telling you, man, people really underestimate the impact this film had. My grandmother-in-law, blessings to her. She's a beautiful person. But she went to her grave hating Danny Glover on the intensity of his performance. Hated his guts, right? Because again, what Alice Walker did is she took an era and she popularized it, she mythologized it by creating dynamics that did not occur on any large scale. Now, whether there was one family where certain things happened, whatever, but this was popularized as a feature of Black malehood, Black manhood, Black maleness, right? She presented this as a feature of Black men and thus provided a response to that feature, which was in essence the rise of the gynocracy. And you can see this in particular scenes. Where'd it go? I lost the, it's not what I meant to do. So let me go in here. You can see this in particular scenes where certain figures played out. So in this, Oprah played Sophia. You can see pictured here on the top right. And at this very wedding, you can see the gynocracy in play, right? Where Danny Glover, after the wedding, approaches her to give, his best wishes, and the gynocracy literally lines up and gets in his face as if to physically challenge him, right? So this kind of gynocracy that we're talking about is already kind of in play, and it's almost presented in The Color Purple as not only a heroic check against patriarchy, but a support mechanism that Black women need to support. So the idea of most of The Color Purple, in my humble assessment, is it's presented as a gynocracy against the patriarchy, right? And this framework of a patriarchy being as oppressive to Black women as slavery was. This is the framework. This is how Black men are presented. But in as much as the idea of Black men being as oppressive as white society during slavery, there's also this idea that Black men are inept, trifling, and incapable all at the same time. So they're brutal. They're willing to beat and kill and grape and do all of these things, but they're worse than slavery in and of itself. There's very actually little to no mention of slavery whatsoever in Color Purple. Much of it is about Black women having to endure Black men. And because this is a feature of Black manhood, it doesn't matter where you go, what you do, it's inescapable. So Black women have to band together and kind of fight it. It's very reminiscent too. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. All right. So, this original Color Purple kind of puts this framework out there. And of course, they wanted to kind of update this for the new era, right? The new time frame. So let's go to that. See if we can pull that up here. All right. There we go. All right. So the newest Color Purple attempts to do this same kind of thing and really revitalize it for the new generation. Now, it is not based on the original film per se. It's based more so on the play, right? Which is a musical. And by the way, I hate musicals, so I really love y'all because I went to see something, and I really hate musicals on just the surface, let alone having to deal with The Color Purple, because people just breaking out a random song, it just annoys the hell out of me. But anyway, so in this new one, they really try to reframe the play, which is a little different, especially by the time you get to the third act. They kind of go in some directions that you don't really see in the original Color Purple, and I can't quite go through it all. But maybe if I bring somebody up who wants to go back and forth and talk about it or whatever, then more might fall out in terms of the details. Now, I will say this: if we cover the things I liked, all right. If I'm going to treat this purely as a piece of entertainment that I don't have any politics about, I'm a sucker for bringing the original actors back into an updated film. you know so if you do a Batman movie and Adam West walks by in the background, I kind of like that kind of stuff or whatever. So they had Whoopi in here for a little minute. The symmetry of that, always, on a general level, you know is whatever. I'll say what most people know: Fantasia can sing. She can sing well. There's no question about that as far as I'm concerned. Fantasia can sing. Um, let me see. Taraji. Here's Taraji to me plays Shug Avery, and if you're not familiar, Shug Avery, is really kind of the modern woman at this time. Starts not long after the turn of the century, the 20th century, through the mid 20th century, and Shug Avery is, of course, the woman that Mister is in love with, but wasn't able to marry, and he marries Celie instead. But still tries to get with Shug on a regular basis, and he does off and on over time, at least until she marries somebody else. And so Shug is the modern woman of that era. And the reason I say that is because when it comes to Taraji's performance, to me, Taraji is Shug. She is Shug in 2023. You know what I mean? So for her, I thought this was an effortless performance because she literally played herself just in another time period, in my humble opinion. And that said, to me, she was the only cast member that actually played her character better than the original, right? In my humble opinion, free to disagree, whatever. I'm not, really gonna lose any sleep about anybody arguing with that. It's just a personal, kind of observation. Even in terms of, you remember Suge, her biggest problem in the film was that she wanted her father's love and approval, even though, she was considered a sinner and her father was a pastor and didn't want to have nothing to do with her. And that's still, of course, the case in the updated movie. And to me, it's very reminiscent of Taraji in real life, because Taraji has had some back and forth kind of observations about Black men in the last couple of years that suggest that she has a similar kind of framework going on. Where at one vein she's doing, she's making statements in public about how Black women need Black men and we love Black men, and then she'll turn around and say we all trifling. I mean, she has this kind of love-hate thing going on with Black men that I think is very reminiscent of Shook. So I think in that respect, just to kind of cover some of the things I like, that's about it. I didn't find too many of the songs moving, but then again, I'm not the target audience, so whatever. As far as the dislikes, again, just on a media level, almost every character of note was acted better in 1985, just on a purely entertainment level, not even getting into the politics of misandry. Um, you know, uh, Coleman Domingo plays Mr. I've enjoyed him in other projects. He was lackluster to me. Danny Glover, kind of played it. Whoopi, it was kind of played Celie much better than Fantasia did, in my humble opinion. And that goes all the way to, from Harpo to Squeak to most particularly Sophia. So if you look at the picture in front of you on the left, the banner that says color purple, on the left hand side, the darker skinned woman in the white shirt, that's the woman who plays Sophia, which was the role Oprah played back in the day. I guess her name is Danielle Brooks, right? So I commented to my boy about this, and he put it far better than I could. He said, watching this for you was like watching kids playing dress up with something they haven't experienced. Now, that isn't to say that the 1985 crew had direct experience with this either, but it was almost like they were dressing up. The newest one was they were dressing up for, what they saw the elders did, but there was a lack in terms of the performance. And that's most particularly observable with Sophia. I mean, strange as it is to say, Oprah Winfrey's Sophia was a lot more intense and believable. I mean, in certain respects than what I saw with Danielle. I don't know. Orange Pill Nurse says, what's funny is when Alice Walker was married to her white husband for 9 years, she spoke how they were attacked and harassed by white folks and the KKK, but she took the time to make a story about the big black boogeyman. Yeah, it pays. Just like we saw with Harriet, right? We can't talk about slave catchers unless we fictionally create a black male slave catcher who's going after Harriet, right? And at the same time, sitting there talking to white men about how he enjoys white prostitutes and doesn't get lynched, right? But, that's the thing. It makes money if you can fabricate the boogeyman, the black boogeyman. Michael says, I had to full on verbally fight with my 70-year-old grandmother to stop trying to get my wife to go see it with me. He said she even told my wife she don't have to do what I say, even though I explained I'm protecting my family from poison. Damn, Michael. Go ahead. I'm not mad at you. Even the subject matter, is poison. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. That's why a lot of passport bros, if they get married, they stay where they are. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, that's one of the rationales behind it. Because they don't want this kind of culture, being injected into their family. They're literally trying to create families, where they don't have to deal with embedded misandry. And in African American culture, misandry is at this point, it's not only an occurrence or part of the culture. I truly believe it is, but it's actually considered a social good as far as Black women are concerned. As a matter of fact, I think they even rate each other's femininity, quote unquote, on the basis of whether or not, misandry is a feature, is something that the individual woman in question is willing to engage. So in other words, I put it to you this way. I used to hear older women say things like, there's somebody I want you to meet, this young woman I think you like, and she'll keep you on your toes. She won't take your shit, as if somehow this presentation of an argumentative, kind of back and forth is something men want, right? But the idea is simply because she's strong and independent and she won't take your shit, that this is somehow a good woman for you. And this is partly because I'm arguing that misandry is, deeply embedded in African American culture, and it's considered a social good by women. They measure each other on the basis of it. I've even been with women that haven't engaged in misandry and only began to when pressured by girlfriends, parents, so on and so forth. Like the closer we got in a relationship, she found the pressure to make sure that she was in control of her situation kind of took over how she acted in the relationship. So up until that point, everything was cool. And then when her girlfriends or her mother or whatever, grandmother, aunties, when they saw that she wasn't being misandrous enough, they pressured her to do so. Right. And it could be something as simple as not bringing you a plate at her family gathering, right? Or, jumping into conversations to check her about what she seems to be, not being argumentative enough about, like these kind of little micro moments where you kind of see this push to carry out a certain type of Black manhood, a Black womanhood, excuse me, that is very masculine in its presentation, but also very contradictory, right? Because there's a sort of pride in being willing to let other women know that you don't take him too seriously, right? This idea that as a strong woman, you're not going to be manipulated by a man, and you demonstrate this to other women by being argumentative, defensive, and misandrous. And this is the kind of culture we live in. And women high five each other on the basis of this. You ever sit and listen to a group of women in the kitchen or in the living room just start to talk, and eventually the subject of men come up? As a kid growing up in a family full of women, I heard the war council many a time. Many a time. Didn't even know what it was until I was old enough to be a member, be a mention in the war council. But this is the basic idea. This is where we've gotten to, right? Where the framework for how men are even discussed and thought about is rooted along misandrous lines. And a woman's womanhood is measured by other women based on how well she can take him down, how well she can, as BGS always says, get him told, right? This is the framework. And what films like this did is they popularized it and put it out into the public in mass. So you weren't having family gatherings and individual outings with women that as the way to kind of disseminate this idea and reinforce it. Now they were able to support it in pop culture and mainstream culture and receive white accolade and resources to do so, all at the expense of Black men. And that was it. It was off to the races at that point. Right? Black dysfunction, especially in regard to misandry, kind of took full hold. Anyway, so back to what I was saying, as far as the original crew, everybody kind of acted better, in my humble opinion. Danny Glover did a better Mr. Even the brother that played Harpo was more pathetic in the 1980s than he was here. Of course, Sophia, played by Oprah, I thought was a lot better in terms of how she acted it out. Um, Actually, I didn't realize the singer Her, was playing Squeak. That was played by Ray Dong Chong in the original 1985 version, daughter of Tommy Chong, I guess, from Cheech and Chong. Um, so I didn't realize that was her in that role this time around. David Allen Greer. So David Allen Greer plays Suge's father, and it's less believable, I would say, because when you see David Allen Greer, what he's associated with. He's a comedian, and it's hard to kind of take him seriously as a hard-nosed pastor that don't play. So that's kind of one of the things that's kind of harder to receive. And the same thing actually kind of happened too with where's he at? Where is he? Hold on, he's in here somewhere. Dion Cole. So Dion Cole plays Celie's father, who we find at the end is actually her stepfather. And I guess, in the original, he was supposed to be the father of her babies. And so you see him at the beginning of the film, most particularly. And again, now I would say he was much colder than David Allen Greer in terms of his performance. But again, because Dion Cole is a comedian, you just it's hard to forget that. But if you don't remember the basic story, it begins with a young girl, Celie, who's pregnant from her father, and apparently has two children, right? And both children have been taken away and sold, and she doesn't even know if they're alive. And then Dion, or the father, her father, Alfonso, basically sells her off to Mister, who really wants to marry her sister, Nettie. But because the father is still interested in having sex with his own daughter, Nettie, he sells Celie instead. And so in both movies, Mr. on horseback walks his new wife back to his property behind his horse, right? And then as soon as she gets there, she's kind of attacked by his kids, who are unruly and unkempt, and the whole house, the property, everything is just a mess. And they literally draw blood. In the original one, they threw a rock at her and she was bleeding. I mean, it was just, the idea being that, men cannot hold a family together. It takes a woman. Shout out to Jason for the support. And, women bring order, which in terms of the narratives about masculinity and femininity is the exact opposite in the Black community, right? So in the Black community, you have a matriarchal formation as the framework behind order in the Black family, but in the white community, it's a patriarchal one. And so that's why this film is interesting, because when it pits patriarchy and matriarchy against each other and suggests that matriarchy, or what we call the gynocracy, is the goal of an organized, ordered, loving family, and that men's only role in that is to provide service to women, right? These two ideas being presented against each other, and of course, gynocracy being kind of tilted as the best option. It's in opposition to how white family framework works. We are in direct opposition to that, because fundamentally these films, and the story itself, presents men as incapable of being men. And it's constant in both films, where they constantly compare Black men to boys, children, and of course monsters. That's the thing. We're compared to children and monsters. And the subtle narrative is that you need Black women's leadership to have any modicum of order for the Black family. That's the idea here. Patriarchy in this film is presented in line with, I would say, mostly three men who are fathers and sons in the film, right? The father, who's played by Louis Gossett Jr., he plays the father of Mr. They call him Old Mr. Now, I'm just going to say real quick before I forget about it, I love Lou Gossett Jr., but I wasn't particularly impressed with his performance. I mean, no disrespect to the brother, because I've enjoyed him in other projects. That said, he has nothing. His performance had nothing on Adolph Caesar. If you're not familiar with Adolph Caesar, he was the original father of Mr. in the 1985 version. And the reason that that's at all even mentionable is because he kind of stole the movie. There you see him right there, playing old Mr. Johnson. Adolph Caesar stole the movie in 1985 every time he was on screen. he was hilarious. And in as much as I hate this project and the misandry associated with it, every time Adolf Caesar showed up on the screen, I fell out laughing because he killed it. And it was almost like he wasn't supposed to. I mean, it wasn't like he was given a lot of lines. He only has like 2 or 3 in the entire film, 2 or 3 scenes where he's even present, but just pure charisma. He's hilarious as hell. You know, and that's the one thing I would say, if you ever go watch the original, just look for Adolf Caesar, man. He's freaking hilarious in every scene that he's in, even the way he speaks. And shout out to Lord of Brooklyn. He gets it right. He made A Soldier Story. Saying, if you've not seen A Soldier Story, you get a young Denzel. You even get a young David Allen Greer. You get a lot of young black acting talent. Henry Rollins, a lot of brothers in that film. Oh my goodness. So many brothers in that film. If you go watch A Soldier Story, but he steals the movie, and he's just as offensive in that movie because he plays a conservative. I don't need conservative is not the right word. He plays really a self-hating black man, but his performance is so charismatic, you will be on the floor laughing. You will be on the floor. This brother was so talented, it made no sense. He made that movie, and frankly, every scene he played in the original Color Purple, as far as I'm concerned, he stole it. He absolutely stole it. Shout out to Jess. Appreciate the support. She says, I'll be engaged in 2024, married in 2025, and having my first baby in 2026. All right. Cool. I don't know why that's there, but all right. Malika, shout out to you. Says the movie is black misandric programming for Generation Z and future generations, furthering dysfunction and hatred between black men and women. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the programming that I'm talking about fundamentally. But right now, I'm just getting through the actual media portion of it. And I'm telling you that as far as that's concerned, as much as I dig Lou Gossett Jr., he doesn't really, have anything on Adolf Caesar's performance. And that kind of occurs with each of the characters here. They're kind of going through the motions almost. It's really, just kind of surface level to me compared to what you actually see with some of the other characters in their performances. So, Adolf Caesar kind of killed it in that respect in the old one. But this is part of the problem. The film is designed, as many media projects are, to be entertaining enough to distract you from the poison you're being injected with. And that poison is basically not necessarily a reordering of the black family, but an idea presented as to the proper order of the black family. And that is under the servitude of women. Right? This is the kind of idea you get from The Color Purple. From its very first scene, black men are presented as disrupting the natural happiness of black girls and women simply because they exist. Right. In the original one, it starts with 2 girls running through a field, Celie and Nettie. And then right from there, their father shows up. Right. Now, of course, again, he's not the biological father of either one, but they don't know that. He shows up, and the first thing he tells Celie is, you have the ugliest smile in creation. Out of nowhere. No context. They're laughing. They're running through a field. God is purple, and they're doing all of this stuff and having fun and laughing. And he shows up, says, it's time for dinner. Celie, you got the ugliest smile in creation. And then from there, the very next scene you see, she's having a baby, and they draw in on his hands. His big black hands reach in and grab the baby out of her arms and takes the baby away. These are the kind of things that, you're supposed to hate black men, and they give you plenty of reason. Now, it's not a whole lot different from the first one. I mean, this one, they don't kind of weigh in as hard in the early scenes, but this is the actual scene you see in the beginning. And Nettie, as you can see here, wearing this kind of hat, it kind of looks like a halo. You can kind of see the hero of the film. And I think this was the case for the first one as well. Nettie, and to some degree Sophia, but especially Nettie, are presented as the goal, right? Educated, intelligent, evolved black women who are inherently against misandry, right? So and this is one of the things I kind of wrote in the theater as I was watching this. So the film is a rehearsal of the disdain for black men. It was originally a large-scale endorsement of independent and misandrous women. Independence and misandry. Excuse me. The film was a large scale endorsement of independence and misandry, which did not necessarily have to be linked together. It was the inauguration of the era of independence, but nearly 4 decades later, they've still been building this idea of the gynocracy, symbolized by the emphasis on sisterhood in both films. But the notion of independence it was about expelling men in as much as it was an illusion. And it's an aspiration, while it's an aspiration in the 80s. So in other words, in the 1980s, the idea was being presented as an option, whereas now it's being fully pushed for in every capacity possible. Now, if you've gone through any of the numbers, and shout out to Medium Man on his channel on YouTube, he's been doing this for a little while, and I appreciate it. He's gone over a lot of the material BGS and I covered years ago, but he's doing it with updated numbers and coming to similar conclusions. Black women are not doing better than black men, but the idea of the gynocracy has propelled to such a degree that you have people saying things like black women are running circles around men, and they're still holding on to these ideas even though the data doesn't show that. But the idea has become so prevalent, starting with films like The Color Purple, that people believe it to be so. Black men are trifling because we're said to be trifling, even if the data shows that we're not. And we're not based on any support we've gotten from the larger society, but in spite of a lack of support. Black men are doing better and worse than black women, despite a lack of support or acknowledgement. And black women have been trained to double down on this idea of independence, double down on this idea of misandry as a norm, because this is what they're told it means to be strong and independent. See, these ideas were fused together in projects like this. They didn't have to be. You can do films about black women accomplishing whatever, starting businesses, getting degrees. You can make those kind of projects. They don't have to be made with misandrous as misandry, misandry. They don't have to be made with misandry as a feature of that. Just make a film about black women graduating from college or starting their own businesses, right? But the idea that had to be linked to black male, monster being, boogeymen and violent monsters, those associations are why these films need to be protested and challenged. And black women who love these projects want you to believe that, those were minor things. That, we just want to celebrate black womanhood. No, you want to celebrate an idea that was presented to you as a form of poison. It didn't have to be. You could have just made a film about, these two girls just being sisters and coming up, but it had to be tied to misandry. It had to make black men out to be the worst things possible in order for it to be made. And we accepted this concoction, most particularly the women, as a norm. And young men like myself at that age did not know what we were seeing. Barry, appreciate the support, says, consider The Color Purple reboot a service pack patch maintenance release to keep the anti-black misandry programming inflicted by the first Color Purple secure and up to date. Absolutely. And done so with music, right? Because I wouldn't argue that the acting was better than the original. I think the acting was actually worse. But you had songs, you had theatrics, you had much more brightly kind of framed attire, all of this kind of used as a form of distraction, right? So now another observation I had in the theater was that black men have not made their color purple, and many don't want to see us do so. I said they see black men speaking up as the problem and not what they're responding to. And this is in response to even the brothers on YouTube, right? What I've seen in the community is a kind of attempt to continue to silence black men from speaking up. And the idea has even gotten to epic proportions. And we saw this with Kevin, that black men speaking up is the problem, but they've ignored why black men are speaking up and what we're responding to. You're not allowed to speak up. You're supposed to just continue to take this. And if you speak up, we're going to focus more on the fact that you're speaking up than the 40 years of misandry we've seen play out on screen and the much longer history of it in the community. Developing as a cancer, metastasizing. We're going to ignore that exists. And we're going to continue to double down on the silence of black men. And we're going to ignore the fact that they actually have something that they're responding to and a rationale for why. And it's reached the point where you actually have black men who are leaving the country, actively absolving themselves. And we're still going to ignore what black men are saying. And now you have a feature happening where people who not only denigrated Kevin when he was alive, but celebrated when he died, are now using his very talking points while still talking shit about the man and the brothers who are speaking up in defense of Kevin or in alignment with Kevin's ideas. You got brothers that never really even listen to Kevin, but still agree with a lot of the talking points that they pulled because Kevin didn't create them. They came from a space of men, and he just kind of focused them and put them out there on his platform. But many men were doing the same. But now where we are with this is you have people who are taking those talking points while denigrating black men and Kevin in particular and using them. All right. Shout out to Ebony K. Williams, if you will. Anyway, I said they're supposed to accept their lot as silence. As men, we're not expected to speak up and can no longer stay silent. They're withdrawing in quiet fashion. Many men are withdrawing, leaving the country and not doing so publicly. The repercussions are still unknown and underestimated. There's been so much emphasis on women since the 1980s that the absence of men is unanticipated and underrepresented. And what I mean by this is as we see men across race, but especially in the black community, start to withdraw, whether it's being monks, whether it's going into video games, whether it's just checking out or buying homes and marrying and having kids or going international. The growing impact of that is unprecedented. And in many ways, I think mainstream public has been ignoring what that means. I mean, even if you take something like high school graduation rates and look at the fact that boys are withdrawing in record numbers across race, and these articles coming from mainstream institutions are doubling down on how they're incapable of socializing with women, and they're just they're too afraid to date or speak to it. Or if this is the way that they're constantly going to frame men rather than actually talking to the men that are actually doing it, because that's one of the things you notice. They actually bring in women in these articles and in these news exposés to talk about why men are withdrawing. And they double down on the idea that men are just, socially inept, they're incapable, so on and so forth. And you double down on that narrative without actually listening to the men who are articulating why. Shout out to Jay Germain. Says black men can never have a color purple sun. The media and B-dubs will cry foul. Yeah. But here's the thing. I'm simply saying that black men never responded in similar fashion, because the story of Color Purple is about this misandrist, or this history of women being oppressed by men. And I'm like, you really don't think brothers have stories about what black women have done to them from the early 20th century to now? Do you really? That's the kind of presentation of this. It's women only have these stories because men are the only ones creating these kind of incidents of violence. And I'm just like, you really believe that? Really? Every grandpa that had two families in the South that didn't know about each other till the funeral, also had a number of kids from his wife or wives from other men. But we don't tell that side of the story. For every man you see slap a woman, there's a woman that pulled a knife out on a man, but we don't see that story. And it ain't in self-defense either. I post this on my Facebook page on a regular basis. Women that attack men, that kill men for doing things like breaking up with them, not answering the phone. There's all kinds of reasons women have killed their boyfriends and their husbands and their kids. There's currently a story on my Facebook page about a woman who literally I think he was under 2 years old. The boy did not want to eat his food. She shattered his skull in 75 odd pieces and then put him in the oven and then buried him out back, called the police and told them a story that a man abducted her child. Police brought in the dogs. The dogs went to the backyard, found the remains, arrested her. And when they offered her a plea deal of 30 years, she said no, tried to plead innocent, even though she acknowledged that she did it. You mean to tell me there aren't more of those stories going back to the beginning of the 20th century? Really? Really? Okay. That's interesting. So, these films present men as the bane of black women's existence, right? And even the original talks about the world being a threat to poor, uneducated women, and frames their response to it as heroic and necessary, right? Latest film does a lot of that as well. as far as this is concerned. Where they kind of break ranks is like in the third act. The original one, okay. There are scenes that were highly dramatized in the first one that did not get the same thing in this updated one. So if you remember the one of the biggest scenes in the original movie, you have Whoopi Goldberg Seeley, and this is where she curses Mister, right? She talks shit about him at his own dinner table. She leaves with Suge, and just when he's gonna run up and smack her, she points her two fingers at him and curses him with, "Until you do right by me, everything you're gonna do is fail." In this version of it, she does talk about him at his own table. She she gets up, gets in the car, and she's just kind of sitting in the car when he comes out, and then she points her two fingers at. I mean, it was just less dramatic. The best example would be Suge. If you remember the original movie, Suge Avery is singing in the juke joint, and she gets the spirit hearing her father's choir, and she starts to sing the song that the choir is singing, and they walk however long it is to the church. Everybody in the juke joint following her, and she's singing the song, and she's actually out singing the woman in the choir. The people in the church can hear her long down the road, and she comes into the church with this whole gang of people from the juke joint, and she continues to sing until she wins her father back and hugs him. In this version, the father is sitting alone in the church playing the piano, and she drives up because she's constantly trying to get his approval. She walks into the church. It's just him sitting at the piano, and she just starts singing until she sits next to him, and then they eventually hug. And it was just kind of like, little kind of scenes that just weren't quite as dramatic. But there's an earlier part of the film where when she's asked about her father and she's talking about how much she does want his approval, she also kind of says, basically, this is the world we live in, and he's just going to have to deal with it. This is not something you see in the original film. She doesn't kind of come off like that. So even though she wants his affection and love back, there's still this presentation of it is what it is, and he's going to have to just, deal with it. So there's a little bit of that, which I didn't expect to see. Now, there's been a lot to do about the lesbianism, being downplayed in the first film, and there's still complaints about it being downplayed in this one. And it was, for the most part. It wasn't, it wasn't like you were going to see a big sex scene with Seeley and Suge. Not that, I can't think of too many people that want to see that, or at least I didn't. Shout out to Jay Jermaine. Just, I think Mr. is Jermaine, bro. Yeah, he definitely is. He's the perennial Jermaine. There's no question about that. So you have a little bit of that going on in the other one. Let me see. To talk about some of the changes or the differences between both films, there's a point after when Seeley leaves Mister, where you don't see her again in the original one till she's on a train heading back to Georgia, and she's sitting in luxury on this train. They don't tell you what she's been doing. They don't tell you how it was paid for, because she's broke at this point. She leaves with Suge with nothing, right? So then she's coming back on the train to Georgia in luxury, and then finds out that she has this inheritance of a house and a business because her biological father left it to her, and her stepfather basically took control of it and never told her, right? So the store he works in, the house he lives in, is all actually Seeley's house from the moment the biological father died, but the stepfather manipulated it and kept it. And then, of course, he was sleeping with a young woman, and he died having sex with the young woman. He gave her the money, gave Seeley the house and, the business, because they were technically hers already. She just never knew. That was the original. In this one, they actually take you to Suge's house. So you actually get to see Suge living in luxury and bringing Seeley in, and she gives Seeley a room in her house. And this is the first room Seeley's ever had to herself. So she kind of goes through that process. It's slightly presented differently because you see where the luxury kind of is. And then they have this funeral for Alfonso, who's, again, the Seeley stepfather. And, Sophia even yells out, "You're preaching," when they're talking about, bringing up a misandry statement at his funeral. And even the pastor basically hints that he went to hell, as far as where he goes after death and whatnot. So it was presented a little differently. We do actually get to see Seeley's mother in this film, which you don't see in the first one. You don't see the mother or the biological father in the first one. In this one, you do get to see the mother in flashbacks. But here's the thing, you never get to see the father. In either movie, Celie's biological father, who leaves her land and business, is never seen. Much like in Raisin in the Sun, you don't get to see good men alive. They're dead. And this is what leads me to an interesting observation I had watching this film. It is presented as a war of matriarchy versus patriarchy. But the interesting part is patriarchy is acceptable when it leads to positive results that women like. Celie inherits house and business. No protest against the patriarchy that led to that in terms of her biological father. All the emphasis is placed on the stepfather who stole those things and lied about it while she was alive. No emphasis on the father that actually presented that. Right. So little kind of emphasis on that. When Mr. uses his largesse to help Celie's kids get back in the country, this time they play it differently. In the original film, he's standing in a field observing that this test taking place, but he's gone to the immigration office to facilitate this. There's no real acknowledgement of him. In this particular movie, Mr. at a certain point tries to ask Celie out. When she makes her way back to Georgia from living with Suge, she has her house, she has her business. She decides to turn the business into this weird clothing store. I think it was like a general store at first. Now it's this weird clothing store where she's making pants that can fit everybody, which is interesting in and of itself because I've seen this with a lot of black, women entrepreneurs. They make products only for other women, and in an economy like this, that's usually a questionable kind of tactic, but that's what a lot of them do. So here you kind of see the same thing. She turns this general store into a store for pants that are supposed to be unisex, but for the most part, men aren't going to wear. Mr. shows up at the store and basically buys a pair of pants and tries to ask her out, which made no fucking sense whatsoever. He's trying to appease her. He doesn't formally apologize, but his whole demeanor is apologetic, and then even eventually asks her out. And by the end, he shows up wearing these pants that no other man would wear to the dinner, and it's kind of received because she says at a certain point, basically asking me out ain't gonna happen, but we can at least be friends. And so even up to the end of the movie, he's still for some reason trying to appease her, and he's accommodating to her and kind of kowtowing to her whim in hopes that she might gift him with some type of affection. He does bring her kids back without her knowing. It makes no sense. It really makes no sense. Dead says it sounds like he bought pants with the buttocks out. It might as well have been. I guess it would be that version for that time. It might as well have been. Bed Mike says, if white people allow their sons to be left behind in their tacit support of the misandrist agenda, what real hope is there for black boys? Well, I think the real hope is black men. What role are you going to play in your son's lives? Are you going to take a mentee and actually train him, give him the information that you yourself were never given? And that, of course, if you have your own sons, are you going to do that for them? But anyway, back to the film, so you had a lot of that happening. And again, it all came down to really kind of appeasing women. And this is the kind of idea we're getting. They do give you some other little cute, cues and clues that we didn't get from the original. So we saw Celie's mother. We never get to see her father, which I think is a feature in black literature and film, even play, and even plays where benevolent black fathers have to be dead. They're not really present. And this is nowhere better seen than Raisin in the Sun. Raisin in the Sun is all predicated on the death of the black patriarch who has life insurance that he's able to leave to his family. The film starts after he's died. We don't even see a picture of him. He's mentioned, he's kind of talked about here or there, but you don't really see him, right? The benevolent, loving black man is not to be seen. He's hinted at, but that's it. And I think the same thing happens here with Celie's father. It says here, I took some notes. At one point, Mr. talked about how he aspired to be in Suge's band, but stayed on his father's land. Now, this is important because in the first one, it was kind of stated once by Suge that her problem with Albert or Mr. was that he was fundamentally weak. And he was weak because he was not willing to oppose his father. In this one, you see him playing a guitar throughout the film at different points. Matter of fact, he's the first person you see in the film, even though his face is covered, but you see him riding a horse playing a piano. The idea he presents later on was that he wanted to be a musician under Suge in her band. And she actually marries, I don't know if he's been the ongoing piano player. I think so, but she marries her piano player. But in the film, you get to hear, him drunk. Mr. is drunk, and he's talking about how he didn't want to farm his father's land. He wanted to be a guitar player under Suge. So you get a little bit of that. And then you get this real sense in this film that God is actually punishing Mr. for being cruel to Celie, and to the point where, the crops are infested with bees, and lightning and storms are taking place. I mean, you really, so they've kind of doubled down on that. Life is hard for Mr. after disrespecting Celie. In this version, God is punishing Mr. for disrespecting Celie. So it kind of takes it to a whole nother level as far as nature being involved in this process, right? Let's see. It says they better explain how Mr. helped Nettie and Celie's kids get home in terms of immigration. So they gave some more details as to what he actually did. He had to, kind of pay a few things and so on and so forth. It's just little bits here and there. Let me see. Nettie's return wasn't as dramatic either. She just kind of, drove up to where Celie was sitting. They get out the car, was what it was. I think they said, let me see, who was Nettie, adult Nettie? I forget her name. Y'all know who she is, though. Better than I do. Come on. By the way, this was directed by a Nigerian director whom I didn't have much experience with prior. And I question whether or not that might have been why some of the scenes didn't really come across in a certain kind of way. But who's to say? I mean, it could have been the way the script was written. I'm not really sure. Where is adult Nettie? I think it was Ciara, people were saying, was playing the adult version of Nettie for that one scene, but hold on. Trying to give y'all as much as possible, because if I went to see this shit, then at least I could do is tell you what I saw, but I'm not looking to do this anytime soon. Anyway, I don't see her listed here, but that's what I was told, or I saw on, on YouTube. Yeah, Harpo was in the movie. There's no question. Harpo was definitely in the movie. He was actually played by the brother who's been playing in the Monster series. Hold on. Let's see if I can. Where'd it go? All right. Damn it. Let's see if I can have a better display here. Okay. Where'd he go? I know y'all didn't put there we go. Corey Hawkins. So Corey plays Harpo. And so, he played Dr. Dre in the NWA film. He was in the latest Dracula movie. He played on Kong Skull Island. You've seen him in a couple of different things. Again, his Harpo, it was okay, but it wasn't quite as pathetic as the original, but it was pathetic enough. I mean, the story in the script was that he's still emasculated by Sophia, and there's actually a scene in this one. There's a scene in both where Sophia shows up to the juke joint that Harpo's built, and she shows up with her new man. Apparently she had some kids for it, by the way. And so, Harpo is not really thrilled about that. And they end up dancing together, and Harpo's girlfriend starts a fight with Sophia. Those are consistent in both movies. But one of the changes in this one is that her boyfriend, Sophia's boyfriend, is a big boxer. They hint at it in the first one. In this one, he actually says he's a boxer. And when the fight jumps off, it looks like Sophia is fighting her boyfriend, and she knocks him out. Now, whether it was actually the same dude, the boxer, or was another dude, it was a dude of comparable size, and Sophia is knocking him out like it's nothing. So you still see this kind of thing going on. Matter of fact, even when Harpo's building the juke joint, there's a point where he and all the men are in there hammering and nailing and putting things together. And then Sophia shows up with her girlfriends with some hammers in their hand, and they kick the men out because they're going to build the rest of the juke joint. And it's just like, really? But these are the kind of scenes that take place, these kind of subtle and blatant forms of emasculation that, are constant in these kind of stories. I'm skipping over a lot. I'm going to put the link in a second into the chat. Let a few of y'all come up because we're going to probably have to fill in a lot of gaps if anybody wants a different level of detail. Let's see. Okay, so they kind of show you. Okay, so when Celie's kids come back, they come with their own kids, so you can see she's a grandmother. They didn't really delve into that into the first one. And like I said, Mr. is accepted at the end of the film, which he's not in the original. At the end of the film, he's just what kind of takes place is because he's done right by her. The subtext is that his life is less stressful, a little more improved because he finally did right by her. There is a scene where you see him actively denying his father when it comes to marrying again, bringing in another woman to help manage things. You see this in two scenes. In one scene, the father comes to visit him and he's drunk on the floor in his own house. There are animals walking in and out. The house is unkempt. He's unkempt, and then the next time you see him, he's sitting on his porch. He still looks unkempt, but he looks to be at peace. His house is suggested to be in order, and he doesn't have a woman. In this one, you kind of see him go through something similar, but not as, I don't think they're quite as descriptive. He does have that kind of moment with his father where he doesn't want another woman, the suggestion being he's kind of gone monk, but whatever. So I'm going to drop the invite. I'm not going to stay on too long, but I want to allow some people to get their thoughts in on some of this. And again, I know there's a lot that I'm not covering. I usually go through an entire film in narrative. I just did not really want to do that, especially since this film has been around for so long. I just have to assume you've at least seen the original. Now, like I said, it's not until the third act that the new film kind of goes into some slightly different territory as far as the story is concerned, but the overall narrative doesn't change a whole lot. And the focus of the film as an updated kind of blueprint for misandry is still present. It's still there. And I don't believe that that's really changed. So this kind of approach to everything is not only still popular, but I think the question is, are younger women going to pick it up and take it into another direction? Now, we're already seeing that in terms of relationships. We're seeing that on social media. The idea is still the same. Keeping 100 is right. Birth of a Nation for B-dubs. That's what Color Purple is. They're a birth of a nation. Indigo says, thanks for taking one for the team. Salute. Hit the like button, y'all. Yes, please hit the like button. Thank you for that, Indigo. I'm trying to make sure there's nothing else that I really wanted to kind of say about this before we close out, because I'll probably remember two or three things as soon as we do. But let me see. One of the most consistent themes in both, of course, is incest, right? And so you have this kind of framework around Black males committing incest as a norm. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, I'm not at all going to argue that incest didn't occur, not by any means. What I am going to, however, argue is that there's been a silent aspect to incest that we still don't talk about publicly. But the difference today from 100 years ago is that you still can find articles and reports about incest in the Black community in regard to Black males that you couldn't quite as easily find 100 years ago. Now, the thing is, these articles don't really get picked up and really presented on the main screen, as it were, the way it does when it happens to girls and women, but it happens quite commonly. And I argue that it happens so commonly because it doesn't have the same type of social stigma that incest and violation of underage kids has when the victim is a girl, right? So this film really tried to normalize the victimization of girls and women in regard to incest. And it really kind of presented, I mean, what more monstrous way can you present Black men than sexually violating their own daughters, right? And this is where a lot of this really kicked up, right? This whole culture of not leaving fathers alone with their daughters, this idea that every man is going to sexually violate your daughter, all these things became quite common. But what nobody wants to talk about is the ongoing sexual violation of boys has never ended. It's never been called into question publicly. And some of the biggest celebrities you're aware of are victims of this same dynamic, from Tyler Perry, all the way down. There's so many men that have come forward publicly to talk about this, and yet it's still not been considered at all a relevant issue. Let me go ahead and welcome A.L. Evans. What's up, A.L.? Oh,
What's going on, Dr. T? It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your channel.
I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me?
Hold on. I think I know what it is. 1 second.
Okay.
1 second. Okay. Try it now.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Much better. Much better.
Okay. Thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your show. I just wanted to I totally agree with what you're saying, but I also wanted to touch on the fact that how dare she, Oprah Winfrey? We see exactly what she's doing. This is not a game. Not only you saying is correct, but basically she's trying to indoctrinate a whole nother wave of the LGBTQ community, for the simple fact, if you look at the real underlying tones of this movie, it's also portraying a love story between Celie and Suge. It's like the first movie. So basically, and I heard somebody speaking about this earlier. I don't know if you touched on it. In this movie was set in the late 1800s, early 1900s, for when this stuff was going on. Yes, we do acknowledge that it was going on, but it wasn't as rampant as Black woman wants to portray all the time. But it did happen. We admit this. But in the same light, look at all the other undertones, as I mentioned. Not only was that going on, look at this is a love affair between two women, basically, and shunning everything that, if it was anything positive throughout the first movie of this, they made sure to keep that so minuscule. And like you said a while ago, they ran up into the juke joint trying to shove me in. I said, we fix it, we do it the rest. I said, when in the history have you, and even back then, women wasn't doing those type of jobs and those type of works. I mean, and come on, we're talking about a juke joint. Sitting in the middle of a lake that he put together, if memory serves me correct, from the first movie. With no women helping him do that, he was all by himself. Harper was all by himself, him and his homeboys, and it was them two who drug a whole piano through the lake all the way back up there. What was them women doing? But then you want to change certain circumstances and whatnot. Like I say, they're in and out through and through. This misandrist of a woman has been on a one woman escapade to just down men every chance she get, every kind of way she can. Right. And it's just pathetic. But I'm gonna digress and let you keep doing what you do best. And I'm gonna listen to comprehend versus just listening to answer.
Okay. I appreciate you coming up, man. All right, let me see. So there's a couple other things I can add about the new piece that I didn't say. So one thing, and these are all just picked out of random. I jotted them down as I'm watching the film. So the first thing is and shout out to Bernard Riley on YouTube. He does a quick review of the film, and he mentions this as well. As a matter of fact, he goes into depth and has a theory that I think is worthy of reflection. There's a point in the film where you find out that Mr.'s ex-wife was shot by her side dude, right? And so, shout out to Bernard. One of the things he suggests is they need to do. He said they need to do a prequel on Mister because it's the making of a villain. But you basically find out his wife cheated on him, and of course, I guess her man ended up killing her, right? And the question raised by Bernard is, well, what does this do to him? And I think it's an excellent question. He raises a few other points that I'll suggest you go listen to. It's a short, I think it's like a 10-minute kind of reflection, but it's interesting to see how you get a Mister based on what happened. And in the original film, shout out to Greg for the Cash App, you don't get a sense that there's anything, that really predated this except for his interest in Suge and maybe Nettie. But short of that, he's just an asshole to be an asshole. But what you find, with this, kind of statement was that he had a life before Seeley that may have played into his behavior, right? And of course, the idea, the tension between him and his father. But instead of confronting his father, he just beats his woman. And this is the kind of simplistic narrative that people are comfortable with when it comes to framing Black men as not being masculine enough, right? And that's kind of what they do with Mister, I'd say, across both films. So let me see. The last thing I wanted to say about incest, because there was one piece of that I didn't finish. When we hear about incest, and if you're on my Facebook page, you've probably seen a lot of this. It's not just friends of the mother who violate a boy that doesn't get talked about, or the older woman or girl in the neighborhood, the babysitter. And if you've ever been molested, here's the thing that people forget about when they kind of sexualize this idea and suggest that it's enjoyable and boys like it. If you have this happen with a woman that you are not attracted to at all, that's when you begin to actually see. But most of the people sexualize the idea of this so much so that they don't consider that there are plenty of boys who went through this and didn't want to. They didn't want to. They didn't enjoy it. It's not Halle Berry coming over your house when your mother isn't there and seducing you. That's not what we're talking about. It often is someone that you may not have any attraction for whatsoever, especially if she's a friend of your mother's, friend of the family, so on and so forth. These things happen to girls as they happen to boys. The color purple presents it as something that uniquely happens to girls, and boys are irrelevant. They don't even make the conversation. So it's still happening today. And the other element of it that we do see in the news a lot more than people think, because you have to look at low-level news to kind of see it, is how many school teachers are violating boys, sometimes getting pregnant from sexual dalliances with boys, but they're in positions of authority and they're having sex with boys. And this is having an impact. And we don't hear about that enough. So you can watch A Color Purple for the first time, be it 1985 or 2023, and walk away seeing incest or underage, rape, right, as something that is uniquely Black male as far as aggressors are concerned. But you'll completely ignore what happens to Black males on the receiving end. And the last piece to that is, if you're unfamiliar, there's a chart that I put out on my blog, and I've shown it many times on my show. When it comes to Black males, males, period, they created a new category as far as grape was concerned several years ago after 2012 called made to penetrate. And when they created this category, it helped reveal a lot of male victimization. Now, it's not limited to males. It's not. You'll find lesbians are guilty of this. Various types of LGBT arrangements are guilty of this. Male on male can be guilty of it. It's not limited to males. But what we actually did find with male penetration, or excuse me, with made to penetrate, is that males are often victims of it. And once they included those numbers, you actually saw that the rates of violation for men and women almost equalized. And yet that's still not discussed in popular culture. Let me bring in a couple of these guys here. Shout out to Dead Set. Shout out to Malika. What's good, fellas?
Peace and love to you, good doctor. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Glad to have both of y'all coming up, man. Yeah. Anything you wanted to say about the film so far? I know we're just kind of jumping around, but what's good?
I gave you a super chat earlier. When I was younger, the scene with the pants. I said when I was younger, like I saw the movie maybe like when I was maybe about 10, 11, or 12.
Right.
But it was a weird, eerie feeling like, why is he trying on these pants and why are these women making him try on these pants?
Right.
This is Harpo. But
Right.
then when you're showing the scene, and I remember years ago, BGS talked about color purple and Kevin talked about the color purple, and we even brought on the pants. But what I said in the super chat I gave you, the pants are a metaphor of Black feminism, emasculation,
Mm,
and control over the Black man, and also showing equality of the sexes.
mm, mm-hmm,
Because if you think about it, the like you gave an accurate description. The pants are for everybody. They're supposed to be unisex. Because now,
mm-hmm,
if you think in the past 5 to 10 years, we're getting unisex and everything, unisex bathrooms, unisex
mm-hmm,
clothing.
mm-hmm.
Um, when we have a lot of talk, I mean, you're a university professor. You have a lot of talk where a lot of women saying there's no such thing as sex, there's no such thing as this, but these pants where you see Harpo, he's among a bunch of women.
Mm-hmm.
And he got back with Sophia, who's already the Mammy archetype, but she's physically imposing, which we all can see that we have. She's like Medea. She's the physical, imposing, big mama, masculine, but somehow loving. But he's
Well,
around these women.
well, let me quickly say this. You're right, because the Mammy stereotype is two-sided.
Mhm,
She is actually the aggressor and the dominator in the Black community, in the Black family. But in the white family, she's a servant, a willing servant.
mhm.
So what we're seeing in the film may be that kind of dynamic. And of course, by the time she comes out of prison, what does she do? She
She
goes,
becomes a servant.
she becomes a servant to the white woman that, she didn't want to serve in initially. So you do see that Mammy element playing out with Sophia. But go ahead.
But when Kevin and BGS gave that description of that pants scene, it was like a revelation. I was like, oh snap,
Mhm,
this is a metaphor. Like, because when I studied film, they said look at the little gems that are metaphors in movies that are
mhm,
trying to say certain things.
mhm.
And to me, just what the pants are, they are an actual article of clothing which mainly men wore.
Well,
But
and I think Mr. Me Too agrees with you. He says, I think the pants store was reference to Celie and Black women now wearing the pants in the community.
yeah, and also her having a store, Alice Walker is showing her, for a Black woman at that time, having the ability to be self-sufficient, the strong, independent Black woman having the ability to do it on her own, despite
Mhm.
whatever situations and problems that she can have.
Right. And Black men are always an impediment unless they're dead or they're quietly willing to serve in the background. And if
Yeah.
men can just learn to serve quietly, they will be appreciated and approved of by the gynocracy
Mhm.
or die. But even in death, you either have to, save her from oppression. Like if Mr. died at a certain point, this is a resource to Celie because she no longer has to get beaten. But preferably, you need to leave material resources to her benefit in your death to be appreciated as a good man. Right? These are the
And
kind of frameworks offered.
I wanted to say, like how you said, we never seen Celie's father, who supposedly is a good man.
Hmm.
And Crimson Cure, shout out to her. She was talking about this a few hours before you and I wanted to put in her chat. Black, good Black men are irrelevant because
Hmm.
if good Black men are shown, or if they're even mentioned, there has to show a level of balance
Hmm.
that starts to
Right.
tip the scales. That starts going to say, well, what about these men over here? Oh no, it doesn't. Don't worry about this. Kind of like that old Wizard of Oz. Don't worry about that man behind the curtain there.
Hmm.
He's
Hmm.
irrelevant.
Hmm.
Don't worry about these good Black men over here. They're irrelevant. It's like he's written off. Her father
Yeah.
was
And
a
the,
good man.
but the interesting thing is her father was still patriarch enough to provide a home and a business for her and leave it to his daughter. See, that was not opposed at all. That was acceptable. There's no point. You never hear Celie say, you know what, I don't want to take that house or that property because it came from a man. You don't hear that at all. They're willing to accept it when it works in their favor. But the presentation of patriarchy as a flawed idea is consistent throughout the rest of the film unless it benefits them.
Yes.
That was the issue that I had. And I wanted to talk about that. Plus, well, let me just go ahead and go into it.
Please.
The idea that she got these resources from this hidden figure that was her father. I think that speaks towards the greater society, because we all know that the stuff that women do cannot go on without the support of men. And I think that that's sort of an overarching idea that they just don't want to deal with, but they can't escape from.
Right.
She lived in Mr.'s house. Mr. was the owner of that land. Mr. was basically, you could say he was a high value man of his time. Yeah. And so they cannot circumvent that. So they would rather ignore it. And I find that mostly compelling, because when I begin to connect the dots as to how we live today, or if I look at history, it's the same thing. It's like, what are y'all complaining about? I mean, the dudes are over there taking all the risk. It's Mr. who's out there working that land. It's Mr. who's out there breaking his bodies to do all of this stuff.
Yeah. And a matter of fact, not only does he not want to do it, he wanted to run off and be in a band.
Exactly.
So what is farming to a man that wants to be a guitar player in a band?
It's sort of my life when I went into logistics.
Yeah, he didn't want to do none of that. And they framed him as weak for not standing up to his father. And that's the only thing you get. You don't get a more humanistic kind of approach to Mr. because he's supposed to be a monster, a one-dimensional monster.
Exactly.
But you also said something, I'll be real brief because I want you to finish your thought, Dead Set. But you said something that kind of tripped me to something I had not thought about before. When you look at Mr. as the high value man of his day, he owns property, he owns land, he's inherited it from his father, he's working the land, making a profit off of it. Actually, in the first one, you see his little container of savings and it's filled with $100 bills.
Yep.
You know, and you're talking about somebody in 1916, but he's got stacks of $100 bills. He's doing well. This is reminiscent to me of the farmer from the film Their Eyes Were Watching God, or from the book. I don't know if how many people are familiar with that.
Zora Neale Hurston's book. Yes.
Zora Neale Hurston's book, made into a film with Halle Berry, playing the lead of Janie. But Their Eyes Were Watching God. I've done a review of it on this channel. And one of the things we talked about is in it, you see her go through 3 different men, technically 4, throughout the course of the story. And the second one is an older man that her grandmother tries to marry her off to because he owns his own land. He owns his own farm. He's an older man. He's not attractive, but he has means and he's independent. He's his own man. And of course, she looks down on this. She doesn't even want to have sex with him, even though they're married. And eventually she just runs away and leaves him. But the interesting thing is, from the practical viewpoint of a woman at that time who's living in the house of a man who has paid for her to not be in the fields, you understand something about sharecropping. Sharecropping was vile enough that an entire population of people moved out of the South to get out of it. I mean, sharecropping, you basically were living hand to mouth, as my grandmother used to say. Whatever you grew out the ground, you had to eat as well as sell. And if you had a boll weevil and something come through that destroyed your crops, like in this version of Color Purple, you might starve to death. So to be able to be a housewife in a home where your job was to cook and clean is presented in Color Purple as slavery. Right. What it really is, and it continues to be to this day, it's actually a form of privilege. If you're in a place where your man can provide you house and home, and all you got to do is cook, clean, and take care of the kids, for most groups of women, that's not slavery.
Yep.
That's privilege. Because if you have to go out in the fields and sharecrop with him, now you're going to find out about work on a whole nother level. You know what I mean? But that's not how it's presented in Color Purple. Color Purple is presented as slavery. And the only heaven is the same thing we see with the film on Madam C.J. Walker, done a couple years ago. I think it's called Self-Made. They do this a lot in these Black feminist films. The idea, the heaven, is that all these women will get together and live in their own female Amazonian Shangri-La, where they live together under one house and they take care of each other and they love on each other. And this is the solution to oppressive patriarchy. And we're actually seeing women trying to do this now, where you actually have two straight women who are willing to marry and help take care of each other's kids. You know, what they call them, mommunes, or communities of women that are trying to live together. But one of the things we're finding out is we're also hearing from butch lesbians and women in these communities that they don't actually, after having a certain amount of experience with other women intimately, they're finding that these relationships are ridiculous, that they don't work. I mean, quote unquote, I can't tell you how many different women will articulate this, even on social media, that other women are crazy. They're coming to these conclusions in the same time as we've gotten 40 years of narratives and stories that suggest to us that the only peace women can find is with each other. But if we look at the stats on abuse, particularly between lesbians, which is the highest out of any frame or any dynamic between, any between intimate relationships, lesbian relationships have the highest rates of intimate partner violence.
Yes, they do.
So,
Doc, if you don't mind me asking, don't they rates of DV? It doubles regular heterosexuals. Their numbers double ours, correct?
I don't recall the exact one. I wasn't prepared to go there because I have charts, but I'd have to pull them up, and I can do that in an upcoming show. But they are much higher. That much.
Yeah, look up that research. It'll be handy for us to use later on. But I do believe their DV rates double straight couples. So that within itself is a telling aspect also. But I digress.
No, you're not. You're absolutely on point. And so these films, even The Color Purple, present this, because it's not until Celie goes with Suge back to, I don't remember if it was Chicago or wherever she was, but they go back to her house. And in this film, you get to see Suge's house, which is ornate. It's beautiful. It's, you could tell she's well off. In both movies, her new husband seems to be well off, although in this movie, he plays the piano in her band. In the other movie, they didn't really tell you what he did. But she's living well. And truth be told, if she married Mr., she still would have been living well. She had options available to her that the average everyday woman didn't, just like Janie and their eyes were watching God. But they look at these men that are providing these resources as failed patriarchs, as failed men who are unworthy of them. Right? But I digress. So Dad said, I apologize for interrupting you. If you remember.
Yeah, I remember. I know I forget a lot.
I do, but go ahead.
Funny thing about, I was going to go back into the part about when a woman's pushing up on you and you don't desire her. Okay, now I've been through this twice. I mean, more than twice, but I was married when I went through this. And, of course, towards the end of my marriages, I didn't want to touch these women. And to have them constantly pushing up, I mean, because they're at that point, they're using their sexuality to try to persuade me to take another course, because they can already see it. My head is already out, my heart is out. Dude, I'm just waiting on the time for me to go ahead and divorce you. And they are pushing up to you, and there's nothing more disgusting to me. And this happened to me with my last wife, than her coming up and trying to lick my ear when I'm already feeling disgusted by her and her behavior.
Yeah.
So when you look at this with like young boys, because sons do get disgusted with their mothers too, and she's trying to push up on them, instead of us being fathers, we see the boy and was like, look, leave the boy alone. He needs his time right now, because he ain't feeling you right now. And we know that type of thing is temporary. They're like, you don't know what you're talking about, because I've seen this with my own son. And then the last thing is that you were talking about how much of this happens to boys. What I've noticed in my own case is that when it happens to boys, it takes mostly on a quasi-criminal type of thing. And that means that the usual stuff that you find in criminal law, it doesn't apply. So now you can deal, in a civil case, and now you can deal with hearsay. Whereas in a criminal court, they're going to knock all of that out. And a lot of the rules that would apply in a criminal court don't apply in quasi-criminal court. And, this is one way, like when they go through the ALJ, this is one way that, women just escape prosecution when it comes to their misdeeds.
Yes. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of sleep grape. Have you ever heard of this?
Yes.
Yeah, see, Dead Set knows what the, well, you both know. So, you know, this is where a person can violate you in your sleep. And so there have been cases where men have literally awoken and found themselves in the middle of a sex act with a woman that, you know, they had no desire to have sex with. And this is not necessarily somebody you just went to bed with or whatever and fell asleep. There have been cases where women have literally broken into apartments, dorm rooms, whatnot, and literally pulled pants and underwear down of sleeping men and straddled them. And so these men, you know, and you know anything about that early morning erection, it is what it is.
It is what it is.
It's gonna go up regardless. So you could just be asleep and nobody else is there. It's you know. But the point is, you've had women that have, you know, taken advantage of this, and men have woken up mid-session. You know what I mean? And imagine this happening with someone that you are not only not attracted to, but disgusted by.
Yeah.
You know, and people say things like, well, you know, that can't happen if you're being raped. You know, you can't have an erection. Even women will talk about having an orgasm in the midst of being violated by a man they don't want to be with. The body will operate as it operates.
Yep.
You can have an erection, you can ejaculate. All of those things can occur regardless of whether or not you want to be there in the right circumstances. We just don't hear these things being applied to men. Right.
Well, I mean, it's sort of like abortion. I mean, not abortion, but pregnancy, because women act like pregnancy is something special, but these are nothing but forces of nature.
Exactly.
You have no control over this stuff. But they act like men, like we have 100% control over when we get an erection. And as you're talking about, let us go to sleep or let us get relaxed and watch what happens.
Oh yeah. There was even I think there was an old CSI episode where this woman was going around with some kind of cattle prod, and she was using it to force an ejaculation. So what she was doing is she was going to high profile men and she was getting them drunk, you know, and she drugged them so they'd pass out. She would straddle them, use the cattle prod, and then end up pregnant with high profile men. And the men didn't remember anything. So it's not until the DNA test that they find that it is actually their baby. And these men are confused as hell. How realistic that was, I don't know, because CSI used to pull from the news a lot to make their content, but it was still an interesting dynamic because even in the midst of that show, there wasn't, you know, people didn't really, you know, step back and say, wow, we didn't know men could be vulnerable like this. Not at all. People just looked at it as a joke and kept moving. But similar circumstances have actually occurred, even where you have young men who are being, you know, who are experiencing statutory rape, and you know, who have gotten adult women pregnant after being violated, and then turned around and forced to pay child support to the women that violated them.
Nick Olivas.
You see what I mean? And nobody cares. These things go on. But I do want to go back to the film because there's another couple things I just remembered that popped up. There's this whole scene with Sophia and Celie having tea, right? So Sophia, you know, they're the house that becomes a juke joint is originally Harpo and Sophia's house,
right?
And Harpo is building it for Sophia. And again, these women come in and start taking over the building. We don't see where that goes, but there's a scene where that occurs. But there's a point where Celie comes to visit. And Sophia and Celie sit down, and she gives the baby to Harpo, and then tells him to make them tea. And he's trying to work on the house, and he's like, I can't be holding the baby. And she just says, you know, basically shut up and do it. So she gives him the baby. You know, her and Celie go sit outside on the porch. He brings her tea, and she says it's not hot enough. She throws it in the swamp and tells him to go make it again. So in the original film, you did have that emasculation where she's walking around and she, you know, gives the baby to Harpo and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But they took that to a whole nother level where she's spitting out tea and telling him to go make some more. You know, there's this kind of implication that he's become, you know, Celie to her mister. And in both films, you get this moment where Celie, when she finally has her big moment to tell Mr. off, she looks at Harpo and she says, this wouldn't have happened if you ain't try to rule over Sophia, which is interesting because she the one that told Harpo to beat Sophia in the first one.
Yep.
But and even in making that statement, there's never an acknowledgement that Sophia has been ruling over Harpo this entire time. And even though Harpo was dumb enough to get into this relationship, right? He
And you
nonetheless.
know what the funny thing is, man?
Go ahead.
It links in today because remember, Mr. said, even in the first one, are you sure that's your baby?
Right.
Yes, right.
Right. Absolutely.
And Sophia never liked Mr. for stating that in the first one, remember? Because remember, Danny Glover's looking at him and he's like, and he even says, you sure it's his baby? And like, Sophia gave that look to Mr. like, what? And Harpo, but the thing is, because Harpo doesn't have a backbone, he's not going to question Sophia.
Right.
And he's not going to, and that's why you could think like, well, Harpo's a simp because his father's a simp. Both of them simp for the women that they want. But the thing is, Suge can psychologically manipulate Albert. Sophia psychologically,
yes,
physically,
yes,
spiritually, emotionally manipulates Harpo.
Yes.
To the point where, it's always to say, a woman's going to try you. A person can only do to you what you allow them to do.
Sure.
And when you take a look at the big Black woman, just like how Dead said, you said the woman that you're not attracted to is being imposing. Like if you stand up to that type of woman, just because Sophia is an aggressive woman. Even back in that time, she's extremely aggressive. And even today's time, she's considered to be an aggressor. She's considered to be the quasi quintessential stereotypical loud, ignorant, ratchet woman. But she's overweight and unattractive. So we see that she's the Lizzo of the South in this movie. So
good Lord. God damn.
You ain't never lie.
But the thing is, she picks the soft target in Harpo.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And this is where we see this, but the thing is, we're going digging layers because any other type of guy would be like, Sophia, I don't know what that baby is mine.
She's off-putting. She's off-putting.
There's something I do want to say about that because I just posted on Facebook, and based on copyright, I don't know if I could play it on here. But there's a video, showing multiple clips from those, talk shows in the 90s. You Are Not the Father. I forget the guy's name. Maury. Thank you. Yeah. So there are a number of clips of men jumping around and being excited, right? And so I put it on my Facebook page. I said, you have to understand something. I said, this is the first time in human history where we have had empirical evidence as to who has fathered this child, or at least who hasn't fathered him. This is unprecedented in human history. And this is the first time men have had access to this. And you think men have no reason to be excited about any of this? I mean, back in the day, if you were with a woman and she said it was yours, you're trying to go off of looks and hair texture and, eye color, and you're trying to hope. But now you actually have DNA evidence.
Dr. T, down here in Texas, in the South, how they do it. What the rapper Scarface used to say in his rap, go take it to my mama, let my mama find out, because if not, I ain't claiming it. This is how that mindset was way back then, and he rapped this verse in early 1990.
Yep.
So
that was my Duke, he called her.
This was the way of the world in the South, how Southerners dealt with illegitimate pregnancies.
Yeah. And there were kids that were mislabeled as not being part of the family that likely were, and vice versa. Kids who were accepted that likely weren't. And now you have a more precise mechanism that we're trying to make mandatory in terms of testing at birth. But I will say this, the results will be devastating to the Western family if you actually could have, DNA testing at birth. It'll be devastating. It will inaugurate a new cultural response, because there's never been a point where women have ever had to worry about that in human history until now.
Yeah, the only time that they had to worry about it, and that's in those nations that had strong religious predilections, because the men, you take Muslim men in Saudi Arabia. I mean, even today, if that woman steps out of line, if she's off with some other dude, just the presence of her with somebody who is not her brother or her uncle, yeah, hell have no fury like those men over there.
Oh yeah, but again, now you have a different level of evidence. I mean, it's a whole different level. So to me, to see men excited about this, I understand exactly why. And going back to what you said about Harpo and Mr. having that conversation, Mr. says, "Are you sure it's your baby?" Harpo doesn't question that it's his.
Exactly.
Now, Sophia then had, by the time you see her again after they break up and she leaves Harpo and she's got her new boxer boyfriend with her, she admits to having at least one, if not two children with him, alongside the fact that he had several of his own kids that he brought into the dynamic. So you look at this from the outside and it's like, this is a mess. There's every possibility that Sophia got with Harpo because,
he's a sucker.
He's a sucker. I mean, what's the term we use in the space as far as that?
Alpha F's, beta bucks.
Beta bucks. Yes, he's a beta. She said it. He believed her. Now, one thing I do have to also point out in the film that I didn't mention earlier too, is there is a reoccurrent song that they keep singing throughout the film that you didn't even hear in the first movie. And the theme of the song is "Hell No." And the women keep singing this. And of course, this is Sophia's song about, and she hints at the fact that her mother was somewhat like Celie. In the first movie, the first time Sophia sees Celie, they're in the house. She's being introduced to Mr. And Mr. says, "Celie, go get me some lemonade." And she, runs off to do it.
Right.
The look on Oprah's face as Sophia is disgust.
Man.
She is disgusted by Celie. The only time, but she pays her a compliment later as she's about to leave. Celie brings her lemonade and she says, "Well, at least one of y'all know how to treat people." She, drinks lemonade. And from that moment, she's a little cooler with Celie, but she's disgusted by her. And in this film, in the song she's singing, she says, basically, there's a similarity between her mother, Sophia's mother, and Celie. So that disgust you kind of see comes from her watching her mother be treated a certain way by a man, and therefore "Hell No" becomes this theme of following a man, listening to a man, fighting a man's abuse. And just like she says in the original film, "I fought brothers, cousins, fathers, uncles. I fought all of them, but I never thought I'd have to fight in my own house." But so you get this element of this "Hell No," which is the rallying cry for the gynocracy. But go ahead.
And the reason why she said it, and she said it like that, Doc, is because I had to fight all my life, had that line and stuff.
Yes.
But the off-putting part about it is you had to fight like that because you was an off-putting woman. And even if somebody tried to come at you with kindness, whatever, you see how she dealt with everything. Like she thought she was a middle linebacker for the Green Bay Packers. Head on, head strong. You couldn't tell her nothing. It was all about her. And she did. Even when she had to go do jail time, she tried to stand up to the white man. So and you see how much time they get, bitch. The white judge, you crazy? Cause if you ain't gonna mind me, I know you ain't minding them black men. So yeah, I got a spot for you. And she kept trying and trying it till she found that fat meat was greasy. But I digress.
Man. And Sophia is so tied to misandry in both films. If y'all remember, once she gets out of prison, she's a broken woman, right? She doesn't, quote unquote, come back until Celie tells off Mr. And she's talking shit about Mr. at his table or whatever. And it's at this moment of misandry that we see the rebirth of Sophia. in both films, right?
Yep.
She comes back at the sight of this misandry, and that invigorates her, and things are gonna change. I'm back, and it's like it took a moment of misandry for that to happen, which is interpreted as a courageous kind of thing on Seeley's part. But the thing that I wanted to bring up that really kind of took me by surprise in the first film, when Sophia tells off the white woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then she gets into the fight with the white woman's husband, and then of course gets arrested. Lawrence Fishburne, I call him Larry, he don't like that anymore.
It's like Larry Fishburne.
Lawrence Fishburne's character is just a background character, and he happens to be there, and Sophia yells at him, "Get my kids out of here." And he picks up the kids and he runs off with them. In this particular film, she's with her new man, the boxer. He's physically imposing. He's huge, and he's a trained fighter. And y'all know what a trained fighter can do.
Yeah.
When this situation jumps off this time, where Sophia is arguing with the white woman and then fighting with white men, he doesn't get out the car. He's looking with the kids in the back of the seat of the car. He's in the front seat. Sophia's doing all of this stuff. He doesn't get out of the car. He's just watching all of this. And then it's mentioned later by Seeley when Seeley comes to visit Sophia in jail. She says that her boxer boyfriend, whose name is Buster, was somehow broken by the incident of her being beaten by these white men. Now, I thought this was interesting because they didn't do this in the first film. They don't show him. He doesn't speak for himself. And that's another thing. The men, they're narrativized by women. Huh?
It's seen but not heard.
Well, seen but not heard, but also, the women tell their stories for them, right? So in any humanity you get, it has to be articulated by the women. But it was interesting to note he doesn't get out the car, and it's later described as he was broken by the incident because black men understand this.
Right.
Black men understand this. Women often don't. And I can tell you this from girlfriends going back to high school to now. They will get into a verbal argument and start a bunch of stuff with dudes 2 and 3 times bigger than them, sometimes even white men. And then when they get popped, if they get popped, because a lot of times they don't, but if they get physically popped by the person that they're starting this violence with, they look to you to fix it.
Well, you know what that is, Doc? You coined the phrase and made it very, very popular. Proxy violence.
Yes, sir.
You understand that? And I remember I had brought that phrase up to somebody. They didn't understand what that meant. I broke it down to them like, oh, snap. And they said, what is that again? I said, proxy violence.
Yes.
That thing is what you saw. And here's another thing which you have to understand with symbolism they're showing. Have you ever remembered a movie that came out in the late 70s called The Great Mancini?
Yep.
Sounds familiar.
The Great Mancini. Yep.
Well, Robert Duvall, he's an Air Force captain.
Okay.
And a famous black actor, he was playing a servant. And his son, the Great Mancini's son, Robert Duvall's character, had a son. And the character Robert Duvall, he's a narcissist and a very abusive guy. Now, the guy, he works and he does work around for people and stuff. And he's a very big, imposing guy. And something happens and the son wanted to jump in, but what they show you that they show the physicality of these big black men. Like how you said, we will see the physicality, but the authority of white men will always make us coward. Kind of like how the way CJ in A Soldier's Story. CJ is a good-looking guy. He's athletic. He's musically inclined. But remember, he's that old country nigga, like how the way he said. But the thing is, how the way we're going to make these images of these big, strong men still look weak in the authority of whites. That right there, what you said, that's showing how the way, okay, how we can still control the big black buck nigger.
Yeah.
And how the way they're saying he's broken. And I was like, wow, really?
Well, he's presented really as the quintessential buck, because there's a point when he first meets everybody, when Buster is at the juke joint and he's introduced by Sophia, to everybody there. There's a point where he says, at least in the original, he says, I don't fight my woman's battles for her. I'm just here to love her. You know what I mean? So here he is sitting in his car watching her get beat by a white mob, and he knows there's nothing he can do about it. And here's the difference. Here's the difference that nobody wants to say aloud. And I've argued with feminists about this for years. At the end of the day, Sophia goes to jail. I'm not saying that's comfortable. She goes to jail and her spirit is broken. But what would have happened if Buster got out the car and started beating up men, started beating up white dudes?
That's the point that I was about to make, because that we knew that would have been a death sentence for us.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about this, because I'm reminded of Nat Turner. And when I'm with this story, I'm thinking about, I know Nat Turner had 2 of his children sold when I read the story about him. And it just made me wonder, up to that point, in, let's say, what was it, 1916 that this was set in?
It goes from the 16 to the 40s. So like it spreads over a whole period.
Okay. Well, up to that point, black men have been inculcated to not be able to mess with white men on the whole. So I'm just, I sit back and I wonder, it's like you take this big black buck and then somebody like Nat Turner, who sat there and watched his kids get sold, watched, people who look like him get beat, up to the point where he decided to do something about it. But how much did he have to endure before he said, okay, I'm taking it back to him?
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a lot. And one of the interesting things is I rewatched Farrakhan's review of the 1985 Color Purple. And we got to remember Farrakhan's a nationalist. So his approach to this is one, he regards the misandry as highly offensive. He does, and I credit him with that. But there are points where he jabs at black men for not basically being man enough by the Nation of Islam standards. So there's this moment where he talks about Sophia fighting these white men, and he basically says, and I'm rephrasing, if these men were real men, they would have died protecting her. And I had to disagree in that moment, in the sense that he's saying black men should have jumped up and died protecting her. One, you protect, who you cover.
Exactly.
And Sophia is not going to acknowledge covering outside of what she wants to acknowledge. So in other words, part of protection is direction. You know what I mean? With women I've been with my wife, there were times where I just said, stay at home. There were times when I said, stay in the car. There was times where I said, well, we're going to go here instead of there. That's protection.
Exactly.
How it's viewed by feminists is controlling abusive behavior, right? Buster does not check Sophia because he can't, because Sophia won't listen. In the first film, when the white woman walks up to her, she's acknowledging how clean her kids are, and she says, do you want to work for me and be my maid? And Sophia's first response is, hell no. Now, you're talking about, the early 20th century, it is what it is, right? That's how she responds. And what happens all falls in accordance to that. In this film, she doesn't start off as abrasive in response to the white woman. Her first response is no, something similar to no, thank you, and then it escalates. But my point here is that she's being combative at a certain point, and usually in a situation where she acknowledges her covering, a man will, basically say, get in the car, let's go, before anything escalates. This idea of black men jumping in to fight to protect Sophia doesn't really work when you're talking about the kind of woman that does not acknowledge black males' authority or sacrifice. It doesn't work. And so in that instance, you're going to find men are not willing to do it. As a matter of fact, Farrakhan actually says the only display of manhood by black men is when the white woman can't drive her car properly and they come out to help. He said that was the only display of manhood, and I was like, God. So here you have these moments where you'll have brothers, especially of a nationalist bent, that will use films like this or moments like this in media to make their own digs about black men not being man enough, but won't acknowledge the context we're in, won't acknowledge the situation we're in. You cannot talk about black men not being man enough and ignore misandry, let alone the sustained financing of the gynarchy by the state. These things are not accidental occurrences. They happen in response to resources and policy. And this has been going on for generations. If you ignore all of that and just make this about individual men in a given situation not dying for a combative, abusive Sophia, you really miss what brothers are actually starting to say for the first time in union in this last decade. You really misunderstand it and you dismiss it as superficial when it's not.
The funny
Yeah.
thing is, you just hit it on the nose, doctor. Sophia is a quintessential woman that does not deserve any covering or protection because of just how the way she acts, by her character, by her attitude, and by her actions.
Mhm.
But then here's the funny thing, fast forward to real life in 2023, almost 2024. There's a majority of our women that are like that.
Yes.
And now they're wondering why, because now we have the advent of social media, and they're wondering
Yes.
why Black women are not getting married, why Black men are just voting with their feet, not just within relationships,
Yes.
within dealing with their grandmothers, their mothers, their aunts, their sisters.
Yes.
Um,
No,
men not really want to come around on family reunions, family situations. Don't want to come around holidays. They might do something, but like, all right, I'll come around for 30 minutes and that's about it. Because men don't want to be bothered. We realize and we have the mindset. See, the thing is, Black men, like how you said, why don't we have our own color purple? Because we don't want to do that, because have we don't have that pettiness in us that we want to create something. And we don't want to talk or create something in that much of a negative effect of creating that. Because first of all, we know even doing that, that's hurting us. And we don't want to do that. We rather just walk away and vote with our feet. And it gets to the point of, okay, we know this is it, but we just rather move on. Like the attitude, how the way people were saying with passport bros or men dating out of the race. We're just doing it quietly. We're not making a big stink or to do about it because we're just doing something to have happiness and peace.
Well,
And
go ahead.
and when we say this, it's the reflection of the negativity. You know, the reflection of the negativity that we have. Just the the problem is that this movie and movies like this is continuing to propagate the misandry that we're fighting against.
Well, here's the thing.
Mhm.
I think Imperfect has a point. We have that super soldier, chip going on in terms of how we've been socialized,
Exactly.
and I don't. I think if Black men actually did a color purple, it wouldn't have to be petty. It could just be historically accurate, and
Mhm.
it would still not be received well by people that don't want to hear Black men's voices. But at the end of the day, we are the first one to resist doing it because we've been trained to believe that any criticism of women is hatred, because this is what we've heard from women in the academy, in families. Any criticism of women's behavior or a woman's behavior is tantamount to hate.
Mhm.
Now, the other thing you mentioned, Malika, that's really on point is that what happens with Sophia between 1985 and 2023, Sophia became a standard of behavior for Black women and women as a whole to see as in aspirational fashion. In other words, her
Mhm.
defiance, her taking charge of her own household, all of that, attitude. And trust me when I tell you, they had a whole dance scene around her song Hell No. And it was as stereotypical as you can imagine. These big Black women are literally, rolling their heads side to side on several different scenes just to demonstrate that this has gone from an individual character in a story to a standard of behavior and
Uh-huh.
an aspirational goal for some women, most particularly Black women, to achieve. The I don't give a fuck, the hell no, the telling him off, the all of
Who's
these
going to
kind
check
of
me, boo?
gestures. Who gonna check me, boo? Exactly. That wasn't a standard in 85. Now it was something we saw in Black families,
Right.
but it wasn't raised to the point of a standard that women should adhere to. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you've ever dated a woman who actually, wasn't a misandrist, but you saw the pressure her social network, her family network may apply to her in order for her to act accordingly. And then you start to see this kind of Sophia-esque behavior come out of a woman you've been dating potentially for months, and you're like, what the hell is this? I don't know if you guys have experienced that, but I've seen it.
Yeah, I've experienced it. But the funny thing about these movies, and this is something I have been coming upon for a long time, is they never ask the question, is this is women in general? Because we know that one of the reasons why simps get created is that they do something that all of us naturally do. We ask ourselves, do our actions compel women, compel the support and adoration of women? That's something that young boys grow up trying to do because you want somebody of the opposite sex. But women don't ask that question. Do her actions or her presentation compel the protection in an environment of men? And then they make movies to move themselves further away and then champion those movies and then turn around and wonder, why aren't the men approaching us? I mean, it's a cognitive dissonance that that I can't even wrap my mind around. But then again, I'm not a woman, so they can rationalize this crap. I'm looking at it and like, all of y'all are retarded.
Okay.
Can I touch on something you said earlier, Doctor, about the Mr. character? And Dead Set, Doc, and myself, we're all comic book heads for years, right? And one thing that we realized, a good antagonist, not a villain, but an antagonist, because the Mr. character throughout the movies and the book, he's an antagonist. He's not a villain per se. They're made. They're not. It's not created just to be created for, the sake of just having the protagonist win. If a good antagonist, there has to be a backstory. And when you said they touched on his wife was killed, his first wife before Billy was killed by her side dude.
Her side dude, right?
So when I hear that, I said, okay, why is she stepping out on Mister? And I said, oh, because, and also one thing I can get from Mister's character is that Mister is a simp himself, because how the way Suge sees that he doesn't stand up to his father. And his father was probably abusive to him or abusive, and Mister was kind of like Harper a little bit growing up.
He was.
So it's the cycle all over again. So Mister takes his pain and his suffering out on Celie. So here's what but the thing is, this is how the way I put things together. And I said, is Mister really a bad guy? And even if you talk about Mister's father, is he really a bad guy? What caused him? Hurt people. And this is we go back in generations. No abusive person is just not automatically coming out of the mother's womb. Oh, an abusive person. No, this is something that is created. This is something that is born into fruition through years of certain things. But if we're saying this to women, I said, how about if we talk about why is Mr. like that? And Nixon said, well, go to his father. I said, no, but let's go deeper. His wife left him. Why? Why is Mr. like that? Why is Mr. like, but when he gets around Suge Avery, he's like Jello.
Well, the presentation by the film is that not only is this passed down, but remember, even the father, even Mr.'s father, is presented as a failed patriarch. So these are all black men, according to what the film presents to us, who have failed at trying to mimic what white men do successfully. Right. This is the fundamental idea. So all of the dysfunction that you're talking about that may be handed down is presented in the film as an inherent weakness and fault of black men as a whole. You see what I'm saying? So even though what you're saying is, if we actually put this, if we historicize it and we actually analyze him as a human being, and we look at what has happened with him, we can actually find out more about his humanity. I agree with you. The problem is the film is not interested in black male humanity. They're interested in mythologizing black men as monsters and pathologizing us at the same time. So you're dead on that. This is
You know
what
what
they're
also they're
interested in
doing?
doing.
They're not just mythologizing, they're also pathologizing it too.
That's what I just said. Yeah,
that's
exactly. Yeah.
And the thing is, what I just said was I'm trying to make sense of something.
Right.
But the thing is, like you said, in this context with the gynocracy, they don't care about that. No, we need you to be evil and evil's sake, because this is what we want to put out. This is the image that we want to put. Because if we, like I said, if we start to humanize you, then we're going to start to bring a level of balance.
Well, the other part to this is, why were they doing this in 1985, and why are they rehashing it now, especially at that time, right? In the last 15 years prior to 1985, you had white women who were pushing for policy to advance women, and they were looking for other racial groups of women to participate. This is the whole push behind third wave feminism. The real mark of third wave feminism was about class and race, where you saw Black women, Latina women, Native American women, you know what I mean? You saw these different groups of women who were now able to participate in ways that they weren't during the second wave of feminism. Second wave of feminism was usually middle class white women, and they were interested in getting white collar jobs and making their own money. But poor and working class women of color were already working, so that wasn't their push. So third wave feminism invited them into the discussion, and they had a whole different list of issues they wanted to deal with. But my point in bringing all that up is that the color purple is this moment where Black women can endear themselves to white feminism by highlighting just how abusive and oppressive Black men are. Because remember, white feminism was predicated on women being exploited and abused by white men.
Exactly.
So Black women could now say, with Color Purple and a number of the films that came out after that along Oprah's, kind of thing, it was, well, we are oppressed by our men too. And as a matter of fact, the Color Purple goes further by basically suggesting that living under Black male authority is as bad as slavery, if not worse. Right?
Yeah,
This
tell
is the
that to an
idea.
Asian woman.
You see that? But it endears them to white feminism and allows them to be able to present themselves in a certain kind of way, as we are oppressed too. And thus we can justify now, because remember who Oprah's primary audience was.
White women.
White middle class women.
Middle and upper middle class women loved Oprah. This had very little to do with Black women as far as I mean, for Oprah, it was useful to bring them together. I mean, she profited off all of that, but her primary focus was, middle class white women. So this endeared them to white women and justified how feminism could apply to them, and Black women could therefore benefit from the policy advancements of feminism.
But I gotta wonder sometimes, though, because granted, we're talking about the color purple here, but even if we look at actual history, I have to look at the setting of slavery, and what were Black women? I mean, how could Black women see Black men as patriarchs when Black men were visually subjugated by white men? And that part of the culture, that part of slave culture was impressed upon men. So it provides a valid explanation for why, Mr. and his father and whatever generations of men before him were kind of simps. And the other part about that is that when it comes to feminism between Black women and white women, the stark differences in culture is never brought up, because there was a reason why white women were obedient to their men. They get their heads knocked off, and nobody was going to do anything to those men when they did it. But you do, Black men, on the other hand, you better not touch that woman, because that white man is always waiting to knock your head off if you knock her head off.
Well, this is the power of Tommy Curry's The Man Not. He actually goes into description about the kind of work Black men did in the community long before you have this mischaracterization by media, what Dardar is calling the flat out lie in The Color Purple and other media projects. He responds to that with, historicizing Black men's treatment of Black women, protection of Black women, the organizations they started, the activism they had. All of that gets brushed away and swept under the rug by the time you get to the 1980s in popular media.
Yeah.
And you really don't have the public discussions on a wide enough scale for Black men to counter the mythology with historical accuracy, mainly because many of us were shocked that such a project would get this far, let alone directed by Steven Spielberg. I mean, this is E.T. Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
How do you combat that? You know, it really surprised a lot of people. So this kind of, and I've said this before, the obscure kind of feminism of an Alex Walker, this small group of obscure Black feminists that are associated with the Academy, all of a sudden through Oprah, become mainstreamed. And this tactical push to associate Black women with white feminism as a strategic mechanism for advancing them is I mean, we had not seen it occur on that scale, let alone through entertainment. I mean, you have the majority of Black women don't identify with feminism directly. You rarely hear them calling themselves feminists. Those are usually the college educated chicks that took a couple courses.
Mm-hmm.
But the everyday Black women inherited these feminist talking points through popular media. And
Yep.
Oprah was the spigot that unleashed a lot of that into the community. So it was through her that you have Black women that have never picked up a Black feminist book still give you the same feminist talking points, even though they don't really identify themselves in such fashion. And so even by the time you get to Manosphere, where brothers are saying we don't have nothing to do with Black feminists, a lot of women look at that and say, well, I'm not a feminist, so I guess this doesn't apply to me. They don't realize that a lot of what they've absorbed came through popular entertainment, from music to movies and TV shows. They've had decades of this.
Two sentences. History is recorded in the mainstream. Sentence one. Sentence two. People are more educated by their entertainment than any other source.
And get it.
Yep.
Get it.
You just hit something right on the head. Just with the 1985 movie. Well, first of all, the four of us, all felt the spigot of the book when it hit. Because back then, because the book came out in early 80s, right? Came out about 80, 81. And because if you look on the back of the book, this is Alice Walker when she had the afro and when she was teaching. And she had a couple of other books before Color Purple, because my mom was a big Alice Walker fan. And my aunt was an Alice Walker fan. And when this book came out, because remember, she got a Pulitzer for this too, right? She got a Pulitzer for this. And the book became this big thing. And this is before social media. This was all word of mouth.
Right.
And this is also back when, very rarely you had Black bookstores. Like Sherazade Ali, she said, I was the godmother of the Black bookstore revival because she was selling that book in white bookstores and they could not keep it on the shelf. Now, when the book got turned into the movie, the book sales skyrocketed even more. And from the book and even the movie, that's when we start feeling the spigot of the Black misandry. I should say the seeds of the Black misandry were really starting being laid. And now it's sprouted into this crazy gynocentric jungle that we have now. And I was telling somebody this. Now I remember I was telling somebody, I said, I was a kid and I remember the buzz of this book. I remember that I remember riding on the train. I remember two books where I could see the buzz was big with Black woman. First with The Color Purple. Second was Waiting to Exhale.
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, I not only do I remember this book being on a lot of Black women's shelves, it was right next to goodness, what is it called? Oh man. With Myth of the Black Macho.
Yeah.
That was Michelle Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
That was another, and my mother had both of those books on her shelves. And as a kid, it was incomprehensible to me. I wasn't clear on what it was, but I saw those books on a regular basis. And as somebody pointed out in the chat, let me at least share this in case people didn't know. I think a lot of people know now. So this is the cast and crew for the original Color Purple in '85, and I want you guys to see, if you weren't familiar, the production team produced by Quincy Jones, and then who do we got there?
Kathleen Kennedy.
Kathleen Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
And her husband, Frank Marshall.
And Frank Marshall. Everything we've seen of this woman, you know, in the last number of years began very early on. And we didn't really, we didn't really perceive what that meant in 1985. But this push, now you got a powerful white woman involved in putting this film out, much the way we seen Gloria Steinem involved with pushing out Michelle Wallace's work. These white women are strategic about its value to this feminist movement that they're pushing. This is not an accident. This film was both an application and a request for membership in this white feminist dynamic. It posed a new ideology for Black women to adhere to and grab onto, that would associate them with some degree of advancement, right? And this is how a lot of that was introduced to the mainstream. So this is what we're dealing with. You know, white women have been intricately involved in these projects. Even the Woman King, as we talked about on this show, was written written by white women.
Uh-huh.
Do y'all remember? Because there was sort of a white version of The Color Purple that came out in 2005, and this book was all over the place. This book series, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah.
You know, I never saw that.
I thought you was going to say fried green tomatoes or the company.
No, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was big and international, because I remember I traveled to Brazil and there were women reading it on a plane at the time. And I remember I traveled to Europe a year, that wasn't Europe, it was Asia, a year before that. And women were reading. I had read all 3 books. And the title literally means men who hate women.
Wow.
Yeah, and Stieg Larsson, the male feminist, wrote this. And when you read the book and people are getting like all excited about it and this and that, and this chick, Elizabeth Salander, went through all of this stuff. They characterize those Swedish men the same way they characterize Black men here. It was awful.
I thought you were going to bring up what could be called the Asian Color Purple. Wasn't that the Joy Luck Club?
Yeah,
I never read that.
It was a book and it was a film, and I'm not sure if it's the same one. But
can I tell you something?
Go ahead.
That movie, I remember when the hype, because that movie came out about 4 years later. That was the first all Asian Hollywood production. All right.
I mean, what was it called again?
The Joy Luck Club.
The Joy Luck Club.
Joan Chen, young B.D. Wong was in it.
Win, Rosalind Chow, all these women. Now you know their faces if you don't recognize their names, but in that film though, there was a definite push for white men. There was a huge criticism of Asian men by Asian women, and you saw these characters who were associating with white men, and it was an interesting. Like even as a kid, I thought this looks like the Asian Color Purple.
Can I tell you something? A lot of people were saying that back then, because that movie also spans generations. Because when it comes down to the modern day, you're dealing with 3 generations of Asian women in America and showing how the progression. But then one of the women in the family, she marries a white guy. He's a well-off white guy. And somehow he's seen as the epitome of success. It's what are we saying here? What we call white men here in
what
was the name? Mr. Cartwright.
Cartwright.
It's that view of Mr. Cartwright that she's finally made it. And it's the funny thing, because I remember like my mom loves trashy flicks like this. But as I got older, I started to peel back the layers.
Right.
And I was just like, wow. Because back when this movie came out, this was a big thing because it was an all Asian cast, but an all Asian female cast.
Yes. And apparently the director was Wayne Wang. So you got an Asian man that directs and produces it. But look who is executive producing it. You got Oliver Stone.
Wow.
So again, not a woman in this instance, but you have powerful white folk in Hollywood who are backing these projects. And this project, now mind you, I haven't seen this film since the early 90s. So I really need to revisit it before I make any strong statements. But my impression at the time was it was as misandrous toward Asian males as I remembered it, Color Purple being toward black males. But I didn't have that language yet. All of these were just kind of numb feelings that I didn't know how to articulate. Shout out to Cameron. He says Amy Tan's husband is white. Cameron be coming with it. But I'm just saying, what we're seeing is that this was not limited to the black community. And I think projects like this were designed to endear different groups of women. Again, this is third world, not third world feminism. It was third wave feminism, which included third world feminism, by the way. So third world women, women in the United States of different racial orientations, they were being invited into this feminist project by white women. And so these stories, I think, were used to do that. And the impact it might have in giving communities, especially ours, people didn't care. They saw it as an advancement. This is how we get to the point where today we casually have conversations about, I made mention, I did a video on how black women, have sought to become their own racial group. Funniest thing is a couple weeks ago, I heard Antonio Moore of the ADOS group. He said the same thing in one of his videos. It wasn't the title, but he was just talking, and he said it's almost like black women have become their own racial group. And I started laughing. I said, yeah, that's precisely what we're talking about. But these are the seeds for how they've done it. Go ahead.
Well, remember on Cocktails for Queens when Ice Cube asked, don't you consider yourself still a part of the black community?
Yes, sir.
And one of the hostess had to catch herself. She had a Freudian slip and said, no, oh, yes. But, she had to check herself with that. But right then and there, I only consider myself a part of the community when it benefits and suits me.
Exactly.
Otherwise than that, I'm my own private satellite. We are our own private satellite.
Yes.
And to Doc's point, he's correct. They're literally trying to, and this is the conundrum they're going to have to face. They're trying to separate themselves from us, but yet and still don't want to be called cis by the LBGT community. Can't even define what true womanhood is because they own this one-way feminist tirade of nonsense. We're going to liberate ourselves come hell or high water. Until our replies, you go right ahead. And we've been laughing the whole way. First it was Roe v. Wade, and then why can't we get no support? No, this is what y'all wanted. Y'all pushed this all the way to the point where these white men said, no, we're going to put a stop to this. Well, why? No, too late. And then here come the LGBTQ elemental P party coming in talking about, no, we're more women than you. Well, matter of fact, all y'all are cis. And he responded. So to my thing is, let them implode. It needs to implode. That's the only
black men have never opposed that. I mean, y'all know the deal. When a black man is seen to be dating out, especially if it's a white woman, everybody attacks him. When it's a black woman, it's seen as an achievement by other black women.
Exactly.
Black men don't say anything one way or the other. If a brother's dating a white woman, most of us are just kind of like, let him do his thing. If he's dating, and if a black woman is dating a white man, we don't generally care. We just leave it at that.
But the your problem now, bro.
It is what it is. But here's the twist, though, and this is, I think, brought up in the comments a moment ago. White men have their own interests that affect this dynamic. So when black women really started saying we're going to start dating internationally and interracially, part of the problem is when you look at black women as compared to Asian women, especially as it relates to white men actually find Asian women appealing. They will marry Asian women. They will have kids with Asian women. White men will have sex and may even reproduce with black women, but they often won't marry them. and they won't build families with them regardless of a pregnancy. You know what I mean? There's a difference in how Black women are received, and these media projects don't help because they further masculinize Black women to the world. And Black women become more of a sexual conquest, one could argue. But when you start talking about marriage and family formation, it's really only Black men that are willing to do that. And Black men will even receive you with several children from other men, and even other men from other racial groups. Black men are the only ones that'll really do that.
I think there's going to come a time, and in fact, it's already happening now, that we're probably going to see this mess diminishing because of of course, the looming birth rate crisis. And we've already seen much of Europe turn inward on itself, with them, not trying to avoid the browning of their countries. So I predict that in the next 5 years, something like the color purple, because China's already started doing it. I mean, they've already made it public. No, you can't have effeminate men in the video games. That one just came out, last week? And of course they were, oh yeah, that just came out. The CCP made it public.
Wow.
Yep.
And of course they were already doing so with movies. So like when the Spider-Man video game came over there, they had to remove all of the pride flags in that game in the Chinese version.
They don't play that.
Yeah. And so movies like this or productions like this, if they want part of that Chinese market, they're going to have to make some big changes. And I think it's inevitable for Europe and the United States to go ahead and make that change, because even with immigration here, we're still at a 1.7% birth rate. Yeah, and without immigration, it would be much worse.
Yeah, there's going to have. Oh, go ahead.
He's correct, and it's dropping daily. And to your point earlier about how the Anglo-Saxons see why he sees her like that and why he does like this, and what they don't understand is it goes back to the old tried and true. The Anglo-Saxon is only go see the Black woman is nothing but a conquest and a concubine, and that's the thing that sits. It's a gnaw in their gut, Doc, for the simple fact they know it, but don't want to accept it or have it spoken out loud. But then in the heart, I can get any white man. No, you can't get any white man you want. These white men literally walk past you and ignore you. And the only time they are trying to look at you is when they're inebriated, intoxicated, inebriated with some form of additive narcotic in their system, and they're gonna revert back to using you as nothing more as a concubine. And if they do mate with you, it's in the concubine mode only. Period.
Well, we're at the 2 hour and almost 40-minute mark. So I want to actually get final comments, and I'm going to just go in order of what I'm seeing on the screen. I'm going to ask AL, then Malika, and then Dead Set. Give your final thoughts, and we're going to transition. So AL, going back to color purple, anything you want to leave the audience with?
Seriously, I can't say it no plainer than this. Don't give that movie any support, gentlemen. None whatsoever. We as Black men should shun anything that Oprah Winfrey tries to even use as a project. That woman is the devil, but I digress.
Well, I appreciate you coming up, AL. Shout out to you, bro.
My man.
Yeah. All right, Malika, break it down, man.
I just want to tease you, Doc.
Okay.
Thank you for taking one for Black masculinity, for going to see this movie. I know it was like pulling your fingernails out, man. It was like 1,000 cuts by adamantium claws, man.
Oh, man.
But honestly, like I said before, this is the perpetual programming of Black misandry for the next for this generation and for further generations to come. Will it stick hard like it did for us from late boomers and Generation X? I don't know. We have to see. because so much information and some, we're inundated with so much information entertainment
Mm.
that will people hold on to it? You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Because
Mhm.
sometimes everything is trending. Because this could
Mm.
be trending today, but then tomorrow could be something else. But will I think it have a still lingering effect? It's a possibility. I think
Yeah.
I'm glad that we have platforms like yours and other ones like Angry Man, BGS, and Kendra's that we can talk about this in a very intellectual manner and cover it in the face.
Well, I think you're hitting on something because again, we didn't have this in 1985.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? There was no opportunity for enough black men to compare notes to begin to frame this. So what you had is individual cats, sometimes in the academy, sometimes elsewhere, that may have figured out pieces of this and tried to put it out there, but there was no platform for us to gather. Now, black women were given a platform. This is how we get Oprah. They
Mhm.
were they were handed a platform to build off of. As long as it worked to denigrate us and thus entertain white society, they were able to advance using it in terms of, and then by advance, I simply mean they were able to be in projects where they got to be on screen and, their careers got to be launched. I mean, you really wouldn't have had a Whoopi Goldberg as a star. I mean, I remember Whoopi doing stand up in the 80s. She was funny from time to time, but she wouldn't have been a star without that white platform.
Can I
And
say something?
neither
This
would Oprah.
movie,
Go
this
ahead.
movie launched her into superstardom.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it
And when I tell
absolutely.
people this, that they said, "No, it didn't." I said,
Yes, it did.
"What other movies do you think that launched her to superstardom?"
I would argue that even the other movies she got later, all the way up through Ghost and those kind of projects, I don't think those would have happened without Color Purple. I
Thank
really
you.
don't. I don't think white society was interested in her until they saw her in this role.
Mhm.
She was the precious of that generation.
Yes, exactly.
You know, so yeah, but here in 2023, you actually have black men that are able to take advantage of social media platforms. And whether you like the conclusions they've reached or not, it's still the first time that I've ever seen this wide a group of black men across, and I've said this 100 times, across class, across geography, across occupation, across color, across language. I've never seen this kind of collective of black men coming together to compare notes about their experience, their lived experiences, their observations, reflections, and their study of various topics, all brought together. And again, I don't care if you like the stew that's being made or not, it's never happened on this scale. And
And
black men are voicing for the first time what they don't like. Go ahead.
and I think this is why we're having such the pushback because you're hearing the other side of the story,
Mm-hmm.
and it's giving us power
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just one or two or three isolated incidents. No, this is not even just happening in America. We've
Mm-hmm.
heard men in Africa, we've heard brothers over in Europe,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and we're comparing notes
Yes.
and we're talking how the way
Yes.
this has happened.
Yes.
But then also, you know what else is backing this though? It's not just the average everyday guy like myself or Dead Set. When we have educated scholars like you, Green Gorilla, Tommy Curry, I'm sorry, Dr. Tommy Curry, Dr. Green Gorilla,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Hasan Johnson, because I don't want to discredit what you guys, but also with BGS. And the thing is, what you're bringing in an intellectual manner is facts, data, and statistics,
Mm-hmm.
which is scary to people that base their discussions in emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not coming at an emotion, but you're breaking everything down for everyone to understand. And we're saying this is not just isolated incidents, this is going across the board.
Yes. Yes.
And this is something where a lot of men are waking up and getting out of the matrix. And this is a problem. And they want us to go back in the gynocratic matrix and just want us to shut up. But
Yes.
it's hard to, when you wake up the sleeping giant, it's hard to put him back to sleep.
Oh man. And you're dead on when you say from look, from Sydney to South Africa, from Tokyo to Britain, and all across the U.S. To South America. I've had brothers reach out to me and tell me how similar the story is there. And I'm not talking about passport brothers who are traveling to these places. I'm talking about natives in these countries that are coming back and hollering at me and saying, no, the same thing you're talking about there happened to us here. And it's a difference. I'm not versed on the history of all these places, which is why I focus on what I focus on, because I know the U.S. experience. But these brothers are nonetheless reaching out and saying this is happening here. We're seeing this feminism being brought in. We're seeing the history of it. That's why, a couple of years ago, I covered that show where I looked at Errol Miller's work on a history of Jamaica. And they talked about the institutionalizing of women in terms of being able to get more consistent pay, find employment, so on and so forth, and the impact that had on the dynamics of the country. And it undid the Jamaican family in many respects, the Jamaican political movement. It was all kind of undone by reversing that framework and elevating women for the sole purpose of dismantling the society. Right. And so we're seeing that happen in a lot of different places, and projects like this. See, we argue, I think mainly because some people are entertained and they want to just say, you guys are making too much of this. This is just a movie. This is just fun. This is just entertaining. You guys are making too much of it. But when you add up enough of these stories over the last century alone, alongside what brothers are dealing with, you start to find there's a lot more going on than a damn movie. But anyway, Malika, you go ahead and finish. Sorry for interrupting.
No, brother. I'm done. Just thank you for letting me come up on your platform as usual. Great topic.
Thank you, brother. I'll let you over at Artisans probably on Sunday morning.
Most definitely, brother.
All
Take
right,
it easy.
man.
Be safe.
You too. Peace.
Man, I miss Artisans Sunday morning shows, but
man.
I'm traveling on Sunday morning, so I can't even get to them.
Well, your closing thoughts. That's it.
Something that y'all said at the end when we talk about all these stories. I have to always ask this question: at what point does an anecdote become a statistic? Because we're getting too many of them. But my closing thoughts is basically on what I posted in the super chat. I'm all for, of course, I'm all for free speech. And when it comes to them making these movies, yes, I agree with you. I believe in voting with our wallets and voting with our feet after they've invested all of that money into it. So basically, my position is this: let it breathe. Let that whole nonsense breathe. Let them join the military, tell their lies, break themselves on those rocks. Because no society can withstand what feminism has become today. I mean, governments know that it doesn't work and that it's cultural poison. And so, the more color purple that I see, okay, the more the birth rates are going to fall. And then we can watch the economic imbalances between the young and the old, and then watch the young people get overly taxed because they got to support this group of older people who can no longer perform in their workforce. This is what's happening. And so for me, when we start talking about the color purple or any of these YouTube, I guess maggles or whatever pejorative we want to use, I'm thinking it's like, okay, it's more food for us to go ahead and point out to the rest of the world that we're not crazy. And then when we look at things such as the Jonathan Major situation, and we can juxtapose that or put that right next to the color purple, we can see that with the Jonathan Major situation, even white boys are saying, what the heck just happened? This is unjust. So let it breathe and let it lay bare for all to see.
Well, and a lot of these white men are starting to understand that you may not be, shot and killed by a police officer because of the color of your skin, but you may find yourself in a Jonathan Major situation at work and find yourself out of a career behind a false accusation. White men are starting to understand that in this last X amount of time, that this gender dynamic is working against them as well. And it's starting to it's been scared the hell out of them. This is why the Mike Pence rules became popular a number of years ago. And they're still in play. I mean, women are still complaining that men in the workplace do not associate with them, and it's impacting their advancement in corporate America. And men have just silently continued to do what they do to self-protect. Is what it is.
Hey, I ain't mad at them for it. So if my daughter can't get hired, baby, you can come work for me. Okay.
Like,
I don't need you don't need anything else.
real, man. I mean, again, it's giving women carte blanche, powers to where she can accuse. Her identity doesn't even have to be made public. She doesn't have to present evidence. And it's still a 50-50 shot as to whether or not you can survive it, the accusation. That's a lot of power to give an entire demographic without any kind of qualifications or checks and balances to any great degree. I mean, hell, you've seen cases just tried in the court of public opinion that have ended men's careers.
Right.
And haven't even reached the court. And men find themselves. I think George Clooney kind of said it best, and he said it in a very non-confrontational way. But he was asked in an interview why he isn't on social media. And he said, man, I don't want to get drunk and say something that I think is funny at midnight to wake up in the morning and find that I am out of a career.
Right.
And that's real talk. And he was alluding to a lot of this, a lot of the Me Too era, but he didn't say it out loud, but he said enough for those who are listening. This is the reality.
Yeah, he's kind of a recluse for the most part. So you don't hear much about George Clooney anymore.
Yeah.
But of course he does get involved in Hollywood every now and then. But I think another big example of this is like what happened in Iceland. And when the women went on strike, and it was like 100,000 of them, and yet the population of Iceland is only like 370,000. So a fourth of your workforce stops the strike, and then the country doesn't even hiccup.
Oh man, they interviewed some of those offices, and the men were like, "We finally got some work done." I think they said HR said that there was so many complaints coming through, and they were like, "You're not getting any work done." But anyway.
But that's just my point. The governments know this. They know that women can talk all of this jazz that they want and make all of the movies that they want about how they're the center of the universe. But every government knows that the backbone of any society lies on its men.
Well, and we're looking at the fallout of several decades of undermining and ignoring how these things are, the way they approach women's advancements has adversely affected men and boys. And there's got to be a lot of cleanup done quick before it's irreparable. And I don't know if we've crossed that threshold yet, but just looking at boys in education, it's and that's just one area, one slice of the pie. It's looking bad, man.
I'm trying the best I can with my son, but I just need him home first. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Well, but that's it for me, Doc.
I told you in January, man, after the case, after the court, I want to holler at you.
Yeah, and I want to holler at you about those characters because I'm serious about doing a treatment on one of those characters, an animation treatment.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was you. Okay.
Yeah, I left that on your Facebook.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that. I didn't know that was you. I was like, okay. Yeah, all right. You want to do some stuff with my anime? Okay. now I know
I like
it's you.
those characters, but that's a topic for another discussion. Discussion for another day. But stay up, Doc.
I'm gonna give you. I'm gonna put this in the private chat, so it's easier to communicate. All right. So make sure I'm in the private chat before I put that all over. There we go. All right. So yeah, so hit me up when you can, man.
Oh yes. Okay, hold on. Let me copy that.
All right.
So I'll send you something on Facebook first so I can make sure of your availability.
That's cool.
Okay.
All right, man. Thanks a lot for coming through, man.
Sure.
Hey. All right. I appreciate you guys joining me with this. I hope we gave it some degree of depth. I know we were all over the place, but it was what it was. Support the book if you can, Solutions for Anti-Black Misandry. You can find it pretty much anywhere, Amazon, anywhere you buy books. Go ahead and support it so we can continue to keep this going. Also, the deal. You can become a patron of the show on Patreon. And also, if you pay for a $10 membership, you're also privy to private film showings where we can actually discuss films as we go live and in person. So if you do that through Patreon, you can engage me there. We got the Cash App, we got the PayPal, the Venmo. Support the show. Shout out to everybody that gave a super chat. I appreciate you. And I'm interested to see, people's reactions to The Color Purple, 85 or 23 version, either one. Go ahead and put in the comment sections. Let us know what your thoughts were, what your experiences were, how this, impacted you. I do still uphold that we as Black men protest misandric films like this, that display Black men as inhuman and whatnot. I think this film attempts to kind of dull a little of that, but nowhere near enough, in my humble opinion. I think at the end of the day, the project itself is poisoned as far as it relates to Black men, and there's no escaping that. You'd have to turn The Color Purple into something it isn't to remove that element, and I think it's still there, and the stain of it isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Shout out to MC Recovery for the donation. Thank you. So, that being said, if you really want to see it, I highly suggest you wait till it comes on cable, because, if I wasn't doing this for y'all, I would have waited. I just, one day it have showed up on HBO, and I'd have just been like, well, I happen to have a minute, so I'll watch it maybe. And that's mainly because I teach this stuff, so I would, do it for a class. But other than that, no. But anyway, I appreciate all the support, and I'll be hollering at y'all soon. Yeah, man. Peace. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic, selfish, and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.